around the AKA Padverse, it's been Alien Week for the second time this year. Alien Romulus is now on Hulu. I've been watching and rewatching that movie since it dropped. So here we go. The Making of Prometheus. This is a 3-hour love fest. And why are we focused on Prometheus when it's Alien Week and all these other things? I just want to give you guys one point. And then we're going to hit it. We're going to hit The Making of Prometheus. 3 hours. There's so much backlash to these alien purists. They want to say the incubation periods don't line up compared to the original. A bunch of these other things, right? People want the Blade Runner universe rolled into the Alien universe. So we have Weyland Yutani. And then, you can just sit down and watch Prometheus. And no one thinks about replicants. Why aren't there replicants in this mining community? If you watch the original Harrison Ford Blade Runner, the replicants are miners. They're workers. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, these purists tear down the Alien franchise, movie to movie, generation to generation at this point. But the franchise continues. And right now, it's in this wonderful zone. It's sci-fi mythology, creationism, all of these things, right? But these hardcore people, they just want to scream at the clouds. And given, they have solid, real points. But along the way how the Alien franchise has evolved, pun intended there, the way it incubated, if you will, it captures and gathers new audience members along the way. And the people that give up on the franchise along the way always have the same gripes. They always have the same things to say. I was there when Prometheus dropped, when it came, that's what she said, in theaters, opening night. It's like one of the last really big opening nights I saw in New Jersey, because I believe I blacked out at that point and just left everything to work in corporate America. That theater had such an energy, and you could feel some of that energy leave the theater. And I want to say it's representative of the fan base, of the diehards. But along the way, I was there with a friend of mine, and that, like, that's the new fan. Like me, I go crazy, like at the time, go crazy, because it doesn't match up with all these other things we know. And I can't sit down and enjoy the movie. It wasn't until it was available on stream. I bought it on Amazon Prime, watched it, rewatched it, fell in love with the music, fell in love with the design work, the way it's shot, how beautiful the movie is, the characters, the flow of it all. I love the way it's almost like a template on top of Aliens vs Predator, like equal the same first 30 minutes. Guys, I dig that stuff. So anyway, couple points, couple things. Let's sit down, let's enjoy The Making of Prometheus. Let's go.
The problem with science fiction is we all feed off each other. That's why they all start to look the same. How do I do this different? How do I get your attention? Have you have bad dreams, bad chills? That's really kind of stopped me doing science fiction, because I thought, how is it going to be different? How is it going to be new?
It's really terrifying when you start to delve deeper what can happen to the human body when things go wrong, genetically speaking.
What if the entire movie is about humanity, us, in the future, challenging this scientific idea of creation? Where did we come from?
What we thought we knew in the first Alien is just a tiny tributary of what's actually going on.
We've tackled a lot of new ground, which open up the door to a kind of different form of thinking. Get bolder, get braver, dare to talk about who made us and who made them.
I think you've got to give the fans something new And you've got to maybe sort of upset them a little bit, or take that risk.
I said I have an idea for a follow-through on the original 4 Aliens, because you really wrung it dry. 4 films on Alien as a franchise is pretty good. Inevitably, it's a prequel.
The idea of returning to Alien, and particularly of bringing Ridley back to Alien, had been floating around for years, and a lot of people had taken a run at it. The day that I got into it, I was not even ostensibly going to a meeting about the project. I just went into Scot-Free to talk generally about writing projects. And they kind of popped it to me across a desk without warning. You know, we thought about going back to Alien. And I said, Alien? Back, well, and I sort of walked through the films in my head, and by the time you get done with the 4 orthodox Alien movies, plus Alien versus Predator, the mythology is so dense I wouldn't have the foggiest idea how to write the next one, where on earth you'd go from there. And they said, oh, we feel the same way, we'd go back.
There's one question no one asked in all 4 movies, much to my amazement and surprise. No one said, who's the big guy in the seat that became known as the space jockey? I don't know who gave it that name. Somebody called it a space jockey. It's not in the film. This guy sitting in his chair in the middle of this craft, clearly a craft, was a big question. Who was that?
I'd never thought about it before, but I discovered instantly that I had all these opinions, and I just started mouthing off in the room. I got very opinionated. Well, you'd have to go back to the shipwreck from which it all sprang, and you'd have to look at that dead giant. The space jockey, the dead giant in the chair with the elephantine proboscis, a rib cage. What do you do if you're gonna go make a movie about that guy and his comrades on some big starship? They look ridiculous, they'll be unintentionally funny, we won't relate to them because they're not people, they're gonna speak some language we don't understand. How do you do it? And it seemed very plain to me that the only way you could go dive into the story of the space jockeys is if their story was ultimately ours. If their story led back to us. They needed to be intrinsically involved in the human story, in human history, and I thought in our evolution.
I first heard about the fact that Ridley was considering coming back to Sci-Fi and that he was going to do maybe an Alien prequel, and I think what I was hearing the same thing that everybody else was, which is he was very interested in this massive corpse that was sitting in a chair in the beginning of Alien and sort of telling a story from the point of view of, okay, well, what was that? And how does that plug into the mythology? And I think, you know, sort of every bone in my fanboy body was just sort of vibrating. Oh my God, I can't wait to see that.
Then that evolved, and from that evolution I pitched to Fox, and Fox said, wow, that's a really interesting idea. And that's where we started to evolve into pre-visitation. Have we been pre-visited before? And the more you climb into it, the more you realize it's entirely logical.
The notion that our gods really came not from the heavens, but from the stars, from other worlds. And, you know, there's sort of no shortage, obviously, of this kind of theorizing and mythologizing, from relatively serious scholarship to wild conspiracy theories, saying that the pyramids, the Inca temples, the Greek astronomers, all of this ancient wisdom, these old accomplishments, were assisted by powers from beyond the stars, that we ourselves were shaped by something else.
It's entirely illogical to believe that we haven't been visited before, because there's 2 points of arrogance attached to that idea. One is to believe that we're it in this entire galaxy. There has to be more, not humanoids necessarily, but more other life forms. And it's arrogant for us to believe that we are superlative, as opposed to we may be minor.
The next day, the head of Ridley's company called and asked me to write that down for him because he wanted to show it to Ridley. You're not supposed to write anything down as a screenwriter without a contract. And I immediately wrote it down, and they sent it off to Ridley, and they told me it would only go to Ridley, and it immediately shot into the studio and up the ladder all the way to the top of the studio, and within 10 days I was sitting in front of the co-chairs of Fox, and we were locking it down. And after that, I worked as fast and as hard as I've ever worked on anything. Ridley and I, and Michael Costigan and Michael Ellenberg, we just spent months in the room, hashing out story, going around draft after draft, and finding our way to the story.
Who would fly a spaceship filled with these horrible creatures on it? What would possess anyone to do that, human or alien? And that's the real question he was always sort of curious about. What would motivate someone to do that? And so the whole premise from the beginning and what then became and now is Prometheus, that idea still is what the movie is. And there's something sort of been very pure and very special about the development of this, because it became about who would make monsters.
We began with Giger's monster. We began with the Beast. That's the core of the franchise. It's the core monster. As a new frontier to explore, we looked at these giants, these engineers, as I called them, the aliens who had shaped us, the old gods.
I came up with saying, what happens if these guys exist, and if they do exist, who were they? And I always figured that pilot was flying a battleship, and the battleship was a carrier of deadly objects. The deadly objects were the eggs, and the eggs were the DNA that would be carried out to destroy, would be used to destroy. What would they be destroying?
The farther we push into the development of the story, the bigger the engineers got, and the more marginalized the original alien monster became, until that monster became a kind of feature or grace note in a larger story that was about humanity meeting its makers, humanity confronting the forces that had created it and maybe not liking them that much.
Spates did a lot of the foot slog and a lot of the stuff around the table with me going, yeah, but what about this and what about that? And this will be Holloway. Are you seeing this?
Coming down the ramp?
Yeah, that's when you'll go to the Magellan Bridge. If there's 6 people, I'm going to have 6 helmets, all got screens on them, all moving. A very good example of their race, so he's kind of like perfection.
Yeah.
Right. Why would you want to find out about who these people are and who made this and who made what? I tend to lob in kind of little milestones in the story saying there's this and this and this, and when it rams it, guess what? It doesn't destroy it. It comes down, bounces, it bowls it, so it goes down, hits the ground, and starts to roll like a frisbee across the landscape, and then rolls after them. I come up with those ridiculously large ideas because mainly I think I can pull that off. And then it's how do you organically roll those into it.
He spitballs freely and creatively all the time, and always visually, he's always sketching and drawing. So that iterative process had been underway for months. We would sit and talk, and he would draw things, and sometimes just stuff he was making up off the cuff, and often things ruinous to the story that I'd written for that week. I'd bring in pages, and he would kick my sandcastle down, because what if this was happening? What if there was a, what do they call that thing where they model a solar system like an orrery? He's like, what if there was an orrery? And I'm like, what would that look like? And he starts sketching, and then I have to figure out what that is and what its meaning in the story will be and what role it will play. And so I throw my pages away and go write new pages. This is an early draft of the script, which I wrote and rewrote and handed in again and again. And this one is one that's been marked up by Ridley himself. And in the early going, you can see the fine detail on which he offered feedback and had strong opinions about individual images, individual words, shadows and light, everything. And I would go through and sort of implement his notes, and highlighting is me telling myself I've done the work I need to do. So we got the side notes, the complimentary ones, better, this is great, but watch out, don't get too much like this. So you get notes as general as, come on, do better than this, be more mysterious, and notes as specific as, I hate this word, use another word.
Conceptually, I think the first draft that I read had a lot of potential and was stimulating visually to an extent that opened up the universe that I had always seen as a claustrophobic interior movie, suddenly became much more involved with the exterior landscape and exploration of it. And that was very interesting, and also suggesting what the civilization that was behind the encounter in the first movie might have been.
Once the story got about 4 drafts in, we started staffing up, and Arthur Max came aboard. as our production designer and artists under him, and really began to push the design of the film.
It's very difficult to build a world of science fiction when you have only a static object and a room to begin with.
I would literally come in and write some new pages, come in and talk to people about them. Ridley would go home and I'd go down to the art room and I'd hang out with Arthur and his artists, and we'd sip a glass of wine and talk about the monsters and what they ought to be like and how we think the scene really looks. And I would go home and come back in at 9:30 the next morning, and there would be paintings this wide on the wall of the scene I wrote the day before.
That group then started in a very intimate way that was really, I think, enriching for Ridley. It took the process that he applies in all of his movies, and these kind of big design movies, he was able to sort of take that process and apply it to a world of science fiction. The concept work on this movie was sort of its own script work, and that was script work taking place alongside the actual script work.
Often I'd walk into that room of artists and I would see Ridley's footprints, and there'd be post-it notes and guys saying, that's got to come down, and Ridley wants this head shaped like that, and this needs to be whiter, and that needs to be desexualized, and this needs to be darker and more haunted looking. And artists would be tearing stuff up because Ridley'd been through and reinventing it with his vision stamped on it. And then I would see that vision and see where Ridley was going and carry that home when I wrote my new pages.
And as a fleck, they can go away and there'd just be a plastic window which will come back up if you want it. Screens will probably be just that simple, right?
Yeah.
In the first drafts of the film, where the monsters and the monstrous complications that our heroes ran into were much more on the model of the classic alien monster: eggs, facehuggers, impregnation, chest bursting. The entire complex of the engineers that you'll see in the film, the pyramidal temple, the underground catacombs, the huge caverns, those weren't there yet. In the very first conceptualization of the film, the exploratory ship made a search, found a beacon, and set down beside what would ultimately prove to be the shipwreck, the derelict from the first Alien film, a crescent-shaped ship. In exploring that ship, our explorers got into trouble, and as they began to meet and find the remains of the engineers and ultimately a living engineer whom they revived, they were tangling with menaces along the way, which were recognizable ancestors of the beast, the demon from Alien.
What I'm trying to do is reinvent the facehugger, right? Okay.
In the early phases, the project was actually called Alien Prequel. It was an early development. We didn't know what it was going to be. We had parts of the script that we had read, early on, and there were chest bursters, there were facehugger type creatures, there were things that were more directly you could correlate to Alien. I had done paintings of a creature that was going to come out of one of the character's chest, and you're going to see these tentacles poking out, and then it would pull itself, it would open up the ribcage and actually release itself through the person. But, Ridley felt it was too on the nose, and he kind of wanted to depart from that. He wanted to do things that were more subtle but scarier and not as on the nose as the original Alien.
Those are things that are decided around a table, and then off that over-rich stew, Lindelof comes in and goes, I really like the script, but we could do this, 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 and this. And so Lindelof will go, carves through it, and suddenly I've got a 3-act piece, 3-act selling tool that I can make into a 3-act film.
What if the sequel to this movie was not Alien, but it was an entirely different movie that started running parallel to Alien, Aliens, or whatever, so that while this would certainly take place in the Alien universe, and there would be all the sort of bells and whistles of what we come to expect from what Ridley originally did, in terms of the tone of it, the way that it looked, but also in terms of how hypersleep works. So maybe it's not a prequel at all. Maybe it's an original science fiction movie that sort of trades in the same stock but really focuses on the story. That being said, all the things that I loved about John's work was that he seemed very interested in this idea of the engineers.
I think, frankly, that he was brought aboard because at the time that I was working on that script, I'd never had a movie produced, and in the view of a studio head, untested. It really happened when we were in the very home stretch. Like, we think we're ready to go, and the studio had two thoughts. They were like, let's dial back the alien monsters and lean more on the engineers, and let's get a known writer on this and bring it home. Which of course I didn't love, but which as an unproduced writer at that time, I had been told to expect from the very beginning, so I wasn't that surprised. And they talked to a number of writers, and Damon was the guy who got it, in their view, and really seemed to love the story for what it was, to understand its soul, and to be happy to carry forward in the spirit of what had been done so far.
And maybe it's a day later as they're trudging to the next silo, you have the birth of the silverfish that comes out of the body of the engineer and comes for her. I think that's the end on the end.
The idea of taking Alien, which is just essentially this very cool, in space no one can hear you scream, it's terrifying, but on a thematic level, it's kind of just is what it is. To take that and suddenly say, now let's start to play with all these incredibly heady ideas, just about, philosophically speaking, about God and the universe, and then you say, here's a bunch of humans that are seeking out a race of beings who may or may not have created life on Earth, and they're bringing with them a synthetic human that they've created. You now have a couple of different generations, and so you have this character, David, on the ship with them, who basically has a perspective of, hey, I hang out with my creators all the time, and you might be disappointed, I have to be honest with you. Suddenly bringing that into the mix, which was very much there already in John's draft, I felt like, okay, let's make this thing about creation, and that opened a tremendous amount of doors, and certainly that was the movie that I think Ridley wanted to make all along.
They are religious, because the whole story is about who made them.
Yeah.
God made them.
What they discovered was never explained in the first movie. So it was really a kind of blank canvas for us.
I do not write well alone, and in this case, it's why I really love television so much, because it's such a collaborative writing process. Since this was the first movie that I was really working on alone, Ridley became the guy that I co-wrote the movie with.
You really are creating not just some characters and a tale, but a whole world, the universe in which they live. And you're crafting spaceships and planetoids, technology and events that can't happen in this world. You're really inventing from the whole cloth an alien species, their language, their cataclysmic fate. That's a great big canvas to paint on.
We had intense story sessions over the course of probably 4 or 5 weeks, at least 3 hours or 4 hours at a time, 3 days a week, before I went off and generated my draft, which I wrote very quickly because by then I had such a clear understanding, going scene by scene. And of course, I can't really think off the top of my head of a more brilliant visual director working in the medium right now, especially for this kind of a movie. And so I would just sit and listen to how Ridley described how he saw the scenes visually, and then I just kind of had to figure out what the characters were saying to each other or how to get into those moments.
To be engaged in that act of world creation is a huge turn on for any writer, and then on top of that, to be engaged in that in collaboration with a filmmaker of the magnitude and skill of Ridley Scott and the team that he assembled, it's just a gift.
Hey, how you doing?
Science fiction is much harder than doing the ancient world, for example. Whereas with science fiction, everything has to be invented.
We tried to be truthful to the first film, but also give moments that were unique and new. And some of that was in the color and the lighting and opening up the atmosphere and giving more scale and depth to the environment.
It's not an aesthetic choice for Ridley. It's a thematic choice. And our job was to kind of make that thematic choice visually palatable and workable.
His attitude toward creating is very similar to the way we paint, actually, which is a lot by creating accidents and almost misdirection, trying to find a way of creating that's not the usual way.
Monsters are difficult because every goddamn hideous monster has been explored. Monsters. These are beautiful. Until somebody comes up with something that's different, you go, that's different.
It was like a think tank room that we were all set up in a building adjacent to Ridley's offices so that he can come and participate. Everybody had their voice heard in that room.
I mean, you could cantilever it
from here. You could just give it a structural post and it just cantilevers the other way as
Right,
well. And then the part that you need to hit the ground is actually...
The walls were lined with artwork. We started off with empty walls, and slowly we ran out of space several times. The discussions were roundtable discussions. Everybody had an opinion.
I was thinking that the 4 tentacles of having it just moving around would be really good acting. It would give you options. That's all.
The design was one of the things I really enjoyed doing. And so between Arthur Max and finding his team, he got in these designers who are kind of cyber world designers. They design stuff on these marvelous laptops. Arthur chose, literally handpicked, I think, honestly, 5 of the best in the business. Absolutely superlative capabilities. And because I can draw, and also there's many reference photographs that Arthur and I always work with a lot of reference photographs, saying like this, like that, but not like that, physically like this, but not like that. And then, so you're suddenly getting absolute points of reference, saying, do me a sketch of this. I don't want it like that because I've done that before. So how do you get off on something which looks slightly different? It's really hard.
That's a great little sketch.
Yeah. Thank God for art school.
Yeah.
We would have meetings, and then John Spates would come in and work with Arthur and us, and Ridley too. It was interesting where I've never had an experience where a director would sit next to me and literally draw, and I would draw and he would draw, and then he'd say, "What do you think of this?" And then we'd flesh it out more, and then show it to him, and he'd draw back over it. Very few people are true artists in this industry, and he is one of them. He could design the whole movie himself if he had the time.
We felt that there was a lot of pressure on us, and it wasn't given by anybody aside from us, but we really wanted visually to tie in those 2 universes, okay, which are part of this one universe. And the difficulty was exactly that, is that on the first one, you're into like a trucker type of environment that's very raw and very bulky and things like that. And we had to tie it in with that universe that's much more sharp and very designedly detailed. And it was very tricky for us to do so without feeling like we were going to disappoint fans. I mean, we are fans of Alien, and we don't want to disappoint.
It's got out of control with the buildup of liquid and calcium over 1,000 years.
Yeah. Although it was supposed to be a highly secretive room with warning signs on the door and do not enter unless authorized, people came and went very freely. And ideas changed as people came and went and encountered the latest thinking, and there was an open forum for discussion. That was, I think, very healthy and fertile.
I would go in there on a regular basis for a period of almost 4 months, actually, designing the absoluteness of the landscapes, the interior of the ships, the rooms, the suits, the creatures that we might see. Everything was designed here with 4 or 5 people.
Hello. Hi.
Wow.
Ridley would come by with, you knew Ridley was coming because a tray of red wine would show up, and with enough glasses for everyone. And I guess Ridley's going to come by.
I love the conglomeration of people in the headsets.
To be working on such a grand franchise, you wouldn't necessarily expect the process to be so intimate and kind of friendly, but it was. It was really nice.
You get an A for attitude. And he just thought that was all great. These are storyboards that are drawn by Ridley. And some of them are just simple diagrams, helping to think through set designs and ideas for intercutting between characters and actions and locations in the movie. And it's really a blueprint, a very simple blueprint at this stage to plan the movie.
I got lucky in a way because I came across a guy called H.R. Giger 29, 30 years ago. And Giger had this one picture, which I always thought was, that's it. That is it. He'd already done it. It was in a book.
We know the ultimate in a sense. We've seen that point. To move back from that was a sort of comforting way of sort of saying, okay, we have to hold on to the Giger type elements. We have to hold on to the purity of the original, but at the same time try and bring in new elements, things that are not necessarily backward from where we were, but are of a similar DNA.
How are you doing?
Sisters Laura and Rochelle.
Right?
We met with Giger personally. He came over and we did a presentation of all our designs and hoped he would react positively, because we wanted him to be impressed with what we had done. We discussed with him some fresco panels based on some of the designs he had done for the first movie that were never used, that really had turned me on to some of the drawings. Said, can we do something with these shapes and designs?
Ridley felt it was very important to involve Giger in the design of this film, and he really wanted to involve him in any way he could.
The other question is, when he's in a space suit, in the helmet, does his head start to change?
We were trying to keep things in the vein of him, even though there was departures. There was definite departures, but he appreciated that, and he definitely, even a few pieces, he even said, that's mine.
This is a Genesis. This is his flight suit. This is his pressure suit. Oh, it's nice, huh? There's his pressure suit.
Yeah.
But I took off this, which is yours, to say, how does he slide into the shell? That's a shell.
Holding out.
You look like a baby. A bad baby, okay.
I know.
Anyway, it's a thought. He saw what I was doing. I think he thought I was so far down the road. I think he was a bit amazed at how things have changed now, how fast things are moving. And honestly, we just had to move quickly and move on. And there's a couple of drawings here and there that he did which are kind of interesting, but fundamentally I just didn't have time. I had to move. But I hope he likes the film, because it's still based on his original origins of him are in this film, which is the guy in the chair. And who's the space jockey? That will always be H.R. Giger.
The pilot chamber is like a sacred cow of the alien tradition, and it was with great trepidation that I approached the design for that. And all of the concept artists were high priests of science fiction and were extremely critical of any outrages to be applied to their icon, their holy of holies, the space jockey chair and chamber.
Essentially what I tried to do was do something that was as close as possible to the original movie's version of what Giger had done, Giger's original illustrations that preceded that sculpt of the original movie, but that also incorporated new functional requirements that were simply not seen in the movie.
A lot of research went into recreating that chair, and you may have thought we just had archival reference and we could just, we had the blueprints. We didn't. We had to dig deep to find reference to reconstruct that chair as accurately as we could, and then everything else from it kind of grew out of that, and all the design changes were very challenging, but to keep it consistent with the original was quite a task.
In our movie, the thing has to articulate vertically and come out of the floor as this giant vertical thing that tips down, introduces a whole different set of concerns for the layout of the various parts. Giger had put in some gear-toothed kind of arcing elements and some feeling of articulation to the three sets of rods that support the cannon on the end that were definitely the starting off point for allowing that kind of an action. But still it had to be figured out, okay, if it does that which parts kind of go with it, which ones move, which ones don't, and how do the layers work. I was able to actually produce a rigged model of how this thing would work.
We shifted the emphasis of the biological forms that Giger tended to play up. We played those down, and we went more toward the mechanical forms.
Sometimes we would definitely clash with the production designer, where he would see, for example, for the whole engineer architecture in those basements, he would see something that's very monolithic and very, very simple. And Ben, Steve, and I will go much more towards the Gigerish approach, which is much more organic and much more, I would say, shocking and almost, very weird, You see this in the design in many ways, where it is a mixture of that, of very monolithic architecture, giant monolithic, and Gigerish world. But in a way, I think it created for a very interesting look.
In the chamber room, there was these pods. We did a ton of versions, me and David, and I ended up kind of taking it over and just really fleshing out the details for it. And really wasn't sure. He wanted to orient it, head to toe. Where were the engineers sleeping? How were they facing? Why were they in here? And we ended up, He said, you know what, we can just put this in front of the telescoping, pilot chair, and it'd be a great story moment where you're in this room and you see these sleeping pods, but you don't know the purpose of it. In Ridley's mind, it could be a different spaceship. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, maybe he's just changing it. He doesn't need to explain why he's doing it. It's for the story.
It was a skeleton in a chair. And I said, well, no, it wasn't. It was a suit. He said, you think of spacesuits in a very conventional fashion. If I'm telling you it wasn't a skeleton, but in fact it was not an eco-skeleton, it's an organic suit. That's what it is. I'm going to show you how it opens and what's inside. Because what's inside is a humanoid.
My first reaction was to be horrified. I was thinking, he's taking such a cold thing, and what he's doing with it, this can't work. And I think that's what he does best. He takes something that you think you know, and he just turns it upside down.
It's probably one of the most iconic figures in sci-fi history. When Ridley was first talking about the idea of having this human figure representing the space jockey character, we all pretty much hated it.
He had seen a sculpture that I had done, and this character was, completely lopsided and really muscular and blown out, and he loved it. The photograph that I took of it too was, it was really hot, so it was really just, it looked ghostly.
It was interesting, but we didn't think it was really appropriate. But then, as the storyline progressed and Ridley was really, he was very confident about this. He was not going to, no one was going to change his mind.
It still retains that, but it looks more helmet-like.
Yes.
We call the engineer an elephantine engineer because of the trunk. It's the suit that the engineers wear in order to be able to travel in space. And when they're not in that, they're wearing what we call a pressure suit. So the design of the engineer was driven from that perspective, that actually the big discovery is that this isn't a creature in its own right. This is a suit. This is worn by another being.
I think Ridley found it more interesting if they were our creators, that he kept quoting the Bible passage, and God created man in his own image.
I thought if you're going to be biblical about it, then is a religion race memory? Was there really God? Was there the Son of God? Or were there visitations of superior beings?
Warrior priests or something.
Exactly right. And here is something slightly ominous, which is a serious pair of high-tech shoes, boots.
We got Neville Page involved. Neville specializes in creature design, and we introduced him to the physical anatomy. That was a brief from Ridley that it shouldn't be like a bodybuilder musculature. It should be like classical statuary. When you look at them, they're very much more compact and less overdeveloped, but exaggerated in every detail. And so we try to express those and overlay them with this classical veneer to make them godlike.
I spent a lot of time developing the ultimate head, which was classical art driven. We kept looking at Da Vinci's work for that bulky, husky body, the strong nose, the small lips. It was like the names thrown out were David, the David sculpture, the Statue of Liberty, and Elvis Presley. And when you hear that as a brief, you're like, what the hell am I going to do? I understood, though, as you look at those three images, you go, oh, I get it. It's that specific mouth, that nose, and these eyes.
He wanted them to be, in a strange sort of way, beautiful and not frightening. Frightening comes with attitude.
The first camera test with the engineer, he scared the people walk around, not because he did anything. It was that unsettling because you did feel the effect we were going for in creating the design of those engineers manifested itself in reality, which is, it was deeply unsettling to see something that was kind of superhuman, kind of vacant in the eyes, blackened eyes, looking down at you and looking kind of upset at you. The way in which it felt like a kind of angry kind of father or angry parent was troubling. And it was, a lit room. There was nothing, he wasn't doing anything fancy. It was just scary. All the actors got to experience that, and they got to interact with an actor and have dialogue with that with those characters and not just talk to some blank screen.
I really like that it's really kind of attractive the same way, because they're beautiful. You want to go closer, you want to touch them in a way. You want to kind of be embraced by them. And that makes it much more interesting.
I don't like to repeat myself. So you're constantly evolving with these guys who are really great creators in their own right. So frequently we'll just talk or scribble saying no, like this or like that. We've now got such a marvelous wealth of encyclopedic wealth of information on any laptop. Like we designed a thing, and this is called the trilobite, by just going into deep sea things and looking at things which are marvelous details. God's the best designer in the world. You can't do better than God.
I think, Carlos Fuentes, Neville Page, and Neil Scanlon's team did a good job of trying to take this monumental task of at least being on the same level as Alien, which was, almost impossible.
Can I do a combination of the veins plus this? Because this is changing cranium.
Holloway is infected. He then impregnates Shaw, and from that, Shaw then gives birth, in a sense, to what we call the medpod creature, which is extracted through from her stomach. That then grows into the trilobite. Also happening almost in tangent with that is Fifield, and Fifield's been exposed to the gloop, and so he begins to go through a sort of transformation independent of that, and becomes what we call the Fifield creature. And that ultimately the engineer crossed with the trilobite gives us what we call the Deacon, and he is the penultimate, as far as the film is concerned, the penultimate combination of all of this.
The idea of biting the umbilical,
Yeah.
maybe it's too much.
I think it's, an interesting idea for the European version. The evolutions that emerge from them evolve to higher and higher forms, which you see illustrated here, eventually leading back to the original Giger alien. So we're basically attempting to deconstruct Giger's alien and show how it evolved from its humanoid hosts, both earthly humans and our space jockey engineer species.
I go, oh, we have to have the precursor to the facehugger that looks like this centipede thing that is a centipede of the facehugger, which got like 100 fingers. And this thing just crawls around, and that's the thing that attacks the guy. It grabs him. It grabs his arm. Then we could have that cool 1970s science fiction astronaut, looking at his arm. This thing has grabbed his hand, and, that'd be cool, right? And I know Ridley's all about that. He gets that.
The medpod creature was really a baby form. He's an embryotic form or a baby form of this, and Ivan Manzella did a number of sketches and designs in ZBrush, and we showed those to Ridley, and I think we got lucky. We showed Ridley something, and he said, yeah, that's great. And so we had that design quite early, and that gave us the blueprint for where we would go later. He just worked well as a design. The fact that the tentacles are fused initially, and that they split and they continue to split to create the tentacles later. This is Ivan. He's working on the medpod creature, which is obviously taken out of Shaw in the medpod sequence. We're inside a little room within a room, really, and this is our sort of fortress, because the work that goes on in here is the concept design for the creatures. We're working on designs here in the UK. Designs have been worked on as well in the States, and it sort of all comes together, and we get a sort of weekly visit from Ridley where we sit down at the table, Ridley with a sketch pad, and we show him sort of work in progress. He adds elements that he feels and points us in the right direction, and we carry on going.
There was one creature that Carlos and I were kind of batting back and forth to one another. When I was given Carlos's image to work with, Ridley said, just give me your own take on it. Give me what you think Alien should look like, the baby, as it was referred to. So I, if it's a verb, gigered the hell out of it and brought it in, brought us punch that it's like, yeah, that really feels like Giger's aesthetic. And Ridley was like, no, that's not it at all. Man, we were all over the place on Fifield. I think I actually spent the most time on Fifield. Ridley wanted variations of a Carlos thing that he did, which was a baby face, and the baby face character that was Fifield was going to have inverted legs and a bit of a tail. It was like a very, very quick morph from Fifield to this monster.
Oh, that one is still the best. Carlos's drawing was
That's Mark 1. That's the original.
That's the best. Yeah.
The concern was, for a lot of it, Ridley's feelings were that it looked too much like a goblin.
As soon as you get to that, it doesn't work.
Goblin.
It's got a goblin. And somehow it's a goblin.
Looks a bit like Gollum, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's better than Gollum, actually.
And then we took it more where Fifield would be infected, still humanoid. Limb length would grow, and we needed to keep some of his features, which, again, that's a real tough balance, because as soon as you start to morph it into a creature, they disappear. So we talked about the tattoo and making that tattoo, whether it be on the face or on his body, and having that become something that will allow us to basically see that it's still Fifield.
Martin, that we saw earlier, is working on further sort of Fifield designs, and again, back to Ridley on those, back to us, back to the sculpting process.
At this point, it was clear we're not trying to do Giger's aesthetic. We weren't going to do the face hugger, and we weren't going to do any kind of metaphor to the first film, but at the same time, this trilobite creature became like the uber metaphor of the face hugger in a way, because it's very tentacular. It's in the same way somewhat sexual, and quite honestly, on that one, when I was done with kind of the face of it, if it even has one, it had the most vulvas that I've ever put into a design. It was a celebration of vulvas, really, which seemed appropriate. It's just the way the organic mechanism works. The fact that it had 7 tentacles, that was a struggle for me quite a while, because we didn't want to do just an octopus, and there was a few images at the very beginning where it looked just like an octopus. But in the end, it was all about one pose that I did to give it a sense of, one, locomotion, and make it look like there was power and strength in these tentacles to actually lift it off of the ground. How powerful can we make this look? And between the combination of Weta's efforts and Alex Alvarez, I just looked at it and thought, this thing's pretty badass. The Deacon, the Ultramorph, I think really from the beginning, Carlos kind of nailed it.
There were a couple of versions of the alien that the Xenomorph, the Ultramorph, whatever it became, it was straight out of one of Giger's paintings. I embellished a little couple things, but I kept it like as close to his stuff as I could. You have to. He invented the look.
Sometimes your first impressions are often the best. And I remember when we joined the project, there was a drawing in existence of a rather silvery metallic looking deacon, the deacon being the description for the point at the back of the head, lying in a pool of fluid. And it was quite impressionistic, but it was great. And I think we went down so many different alternatives. When it came to it, nothing was better than that one thing, that caught something.
95% of our efforts on a production are things that you never see because they're not correct. And that's where all these, not mistakes, but finding what does not work, those are stepping stones, building blocks to get to the right thing.
Alien, for so many visual people was like a landmark watershed thing. I mean, it reinvented the look of science fiction movies forever. When you watch it and you're an artist or a visual person, the level of visual craft and of the articulation of what's going on in the frame and motion and light, it's so well done.
I got the feeling right away that I don't think Ridley Scott just wants to rehash the familiar territory. He wanted to capture the effect of the first Alien. He was going to take the same elements and present them in a new way.
The stylings that we were working on were reminiscent of the Nostromo and of a lot of the Alien 1 aesthetic. but at the same time, it just, covering a much broader palette of different kinds of things.
You can do very flashy hardware, which means nothing, but it's how do you apply that to the story and where does it fit into the whole so that you're creating a whole environment that's credible and entertaining.
I was cast to do development for the human technology. First thing I started on was the excavation. They had these excavation pods. They were kind of like submersibles. They're hovering around, and I assumed it was Mars, and they're digging. They shear off this cliff, and there are hieroglyphs. They approach Wayland to get funding. Wayland doesn't have an office like in an office building. So the first idea was that it was on this enormous habitat, like a huge space station. So they travel there in sort of a shuttle, and they land, and we developed this enormous biosphere kind of thing. It was a huge ring with farmland and lakes and things inside of it. And the idea was that Wayland is already he's basically developing the solar system.
The Prometheus was actually called, originally in the earliest script, it was called the Magellan, and it was this voyage and trying to discover uncharted territories. And then Ridley decided to name it the Prometheus later, after he had already named the movie.
Prometheus is the flagship of the Wayland fleet. Wayland, the character who's our chairman of the board of the corporation, it's his ship. And on his ship, we decided it was going to be state-of-the-art with every conceivable facility, including a penthouse suite with cutting-edge medical facility, communication systems, scanning systems, infinite capacity for entering hostile planetary climates.
Good production design is so heavily driven by the basic volumes of the spaces and the needs of what the camera's going to do and the functional aspects of the storytelling, that Arthur was able to give us all the guidance we needed for all those things. And that last little bit of, kind of icing filigree sci-fi techie stuff, that was up to us to help him with. But that didn't mean that he wasn't guiding the ship in terms of what components were needed and how big they ought to be and everything else.
Specifically, it's a ship of exploration that's got a lot of equipment. What Arthur and Ridley said was that, that this thing lands and it opens up and it becomes like a mobile factory. It's like a complex. And so I started thinking about oil exploration ships, oil rigs. There are these huge platforms that float around on these big legs. And that sort of became the very starting point of the shape.
I wanted to have some kind of animal aspect, like an insect that could land, but also have another level of image overlaying it. It wasn't just an aircraft. It also had a kind of identity beyond aircraft. Great big cargo bays, almost like some insects carry their young under their belly like spiders do. And so these pods would open up, and it would be a modular system of pods carried on an underbelly of a gigantic gantry crane that would be able to fly and freestand.
Probably the most difficult thing with this design was the fact that it winds up standing on these giant pillars, which became the engines, but it can't fly that way. It became pretty clear that the engines had to change their orientation. The Nostromo had its propulsion engines, and then it had these other engines that were the landing engines. And I thought, well, if we're going to make this thing move around, what if there's just the main engines and that they use that for everything?
We ended up with this design with the 4 engines, which became legs, landing legs.
the kind of functional parameters that they wanted with these four, VTOL vectoring engines, and the feeling of a creature kind of sitting on the landscape with these four big legs. Those desires were so clearly strong with Ridley and Arthur both that I knew that whatever I adapted from Steve's had to incorporate that. And Steve, frankly, one of Steve's models was extremely close to that concept. And then it was just a detailing pass. It was just figuring out what's the surface breakup and detailing that will give this thing the scale that it needs, because it's huge. And it has a fairly aeronautic shape that makes it look like an atmospheric flying vehicle. I mean, the Nostromo was like a box. It was chunky, and it looked like it could land on a planet, but it was not meant to fly around on a planet. Whereas this one really could do long distance sorties on a planet in its atmosphere. But at the same time, it wanted to feel a bit like Alien 1, at least in my mind. That's what I wanted it to feel like. And it wanted to have a sense of scale that traditionally they got by, kit bashing tons of little tank parts and battleship parts and all kinds of stuff onto miniature models. And so I took it upon myself to kind of really study pictures of the Nostromo, and I would literally kit bash in Photoshop whole chunks of the Nostromo skin and lay that onto my illustrations to get that exact kind of pipe conduits running on the surface and all that kind of stuff. The landing foot is made up of a piece of a Terex mining bulldozer's shovel bit and pieces of World War II German sort of train tanks and all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, I literally used the old methods.
We tried to do graphics with steroids on this one, very bold, on an enormous scale, including the exterior of the Prometheus, which is kind of based on the graphics from various fighter aircraft, bombers from World War II.
So I did a huge number of color schemes, ended up doing some stuff that was maybe stronger than I initially was comfortable with in terms of yellow stripes and things that were influenced by beautiful Messerschmitts and different fighters from World War II. But I have to say that the use of the yellow and the use of it with white and black graphically, it's worked really well. And what's neat is that it does relate back to some of the early concept work of Chris Foss and Ron Cobb as well from Alien 1. And then I worked on almost all of the human interior sets, whether it be the Wayland Vickers suite, which is up in the lifeboat that lives on top of the ship, or the medical bay, or the mess hall, or the cryo sleep systems, the bridge of the ship, which had this cool idea that Ridley kind of brought back from Alien 1 of the extruding platform, which was very much like Ash's station on the Nostromo, but now we're using it, in the bridge.
The bridge is one area where we actually looked at the design work that was done for the original film. Now, the Nostromo, as we saw when we saw the film screened, I began to appreciate the claustrophobia and how jammed up the spaces were. In fact, Ridley mentioned how difficult it was to film in, but how rich it was because it was so tight and enclosed. At the same time, he wanted a sense of scale on this version, so we had to be large, but very intimate.
The bridge design of Prometheus is actually kind of a Ron Cobb bridge design from Alien 1 that got split into two things. It got split into the bridge and then into Ash's pod, but originally it was sketched as one, and we actually kind of returned it in some way to that Ron Cobb form.
You've got the desk, the cockpit, the main desk for Yannick, pilot, and his co-pilots, and the feed corridors up to that. And it's always limited. You'd be amazed how you have to eke out your budget, because sets of that quality are very costly. It's really knowing exactly what you want. And if you know exactly what you want, you're going to kind of maintain budget. If you don't know what you want and say, I might need it, that's where it goes up.
We wanted a window. So we decided to introduce a gigantic wraparound windscreen, multifaceted, kind of in the tradition of a stealth bomber technology, very jewel-like and faceted. Wrapping under the skull of the insect carapace and tucked under the chin, as it were, so that you could then also include a gangplank viewing platform for the captain and stand out and be able to look down on the planet's surface below you as you cruised on over.
We definitely gave thought to how the different components of the interiors fit into the ship in general, but a huge amount of what you're worried about when you're building sets is how it fits into the stages that you have to build them in, and what's the height and what's the visual effects needs of how far away green screens are. So, you know, the bridge is a good example of something that where the set itself has a lot of height, and then it has to be mounted up a certain distance to get certain angles down below the glass looking up at the people, and then it's got, you know, it needs the giant clearance of green screen lighting all around it, and, you know, at least at 270.
And that all had to be put on engineering bellows, which are big rubber gasketed vibration pads, so that we could do turbulent vibration as we came into the atmosphere and rock the whole ship. And then that implied various elements of design, i.e. is the roof attached to the walls, are the corridors attached to the main space? And we decided not to do that, to detach everything from each other, so everything was a bit free to jostle and jangle. But we didn't know how that would really behave. I thought it might start oscillating beyond control and smash itself to bits. Fortunately, that didn't occur. Then there was design of the vehicles to explore the pad, because in the end, this is an archaeological scientific expedition. So the vehicles had to be able to cope with every kind of inhospitable environment that you can imagine. And how do we actually make a functioning vehicle? And not only one vehicle, but 6.
It was very interesting to take a different take that was done on other movies, which is not something military. The goal here, when we worked on the rover and other vehicles, was to have a kind of a design that reflects something more like a National Geographic, you know, a team of explorers, and not at all something military. It was more a take that was about explorers and something that had like a high money in order to build those vehicles, and something that's very technically sharp.
And we ended up building 3 large rovers and some ATVs, which were all practical and would be used on locations. We wanted them to go, you know, 50 miles an hour with a dozen people on board.
So all that had to be designed, and the interior of those buses. The buses are driven by electronics, so there's all the screens. There's 1 million screens in every feasible space on that ship and inside each of these vehicles.
So we went to the military, of course, because they have the best toys. And then we got several different chassis and did concept designs on each of them in sketch form to present to Ridley. And this went on for about a month. We got a load of notions that basically went from vehicles that had passengers sitting on the outside, others that hovered and flew. So there was a very free-ranging design phase that embraced all kinds of, we didn't want to put any limits on Ridley, saying, you know, this is possible. And he picked on a few basic ideas and gave us some of his famous Ridley Graham sketches to discuss what the shape language was. And we developed from there. We ended up on a Czechoslovakian surplus chassis, a vehicle called a Tatra 8x8, which is an all-terrain, all-wheel steering, broken axle, high-speed military transport vehicle, and designed our body shell on that, based on an armored personnel carrier. Not that there was going to be any battle scenes, but the thinking was that these scientists and explorers of unknown planets would be prepared to encounter anything. We got 3 of them over from Czechoslovakia, stripped them all down of their old truck bodies, and then we blasted out in a great hurry because of the constraints of time. I think it took us 11 weeks to build from scratch once we got the chassis. Most car companies take about a year or 2 to develop a design, and then about a year to actually come up with a single prototype vehicle. So that gives you a sense of how accelerated film process is. A body shell that had a lot of input from Ridley about the nuance of the proportions of windows and angles. So it had a very aggressive character with great visibility. And accessorized using all LED lighting. We wanted to be state-of-the-art for film lighting, so all the lighting was custom designed and installed. Every element of the vehicle is made from scratch, including the body shell, interior paneling, seating, and all applied to the basic Tatra chassis.
It's very much about people for Ridley, this story, and not about what could a crazy biotechnological alien race look like and function like. It's not really about that. It's about this kind of religious pursuit of the main character and her quest for answers.
There was a lot of craftsmen, a lot of artists, a lot of technicians, art directors, set designers, draftspersons who worked with me. And without the craft skills that they brought and the devotion to the work that they brought, it wouldn't be the movie that it is.
Ridley, because he created this universe, is much less precious about it than anybody else on the planet. All of us see it as something that's written in stone and that has gone on to this incredible life as a franchise and a series and comic books and all this kind of stuff. To Ridley, it's I think he's aware of all those things, but fundamentally it's still just a job he did in the 1970s. It's something that he came up with, and if that's what it is, then he can change it.
Ellie! Ridley said to me at one point, I have fantastic actors in all parts, you know, even in the smallest part.
I think he really loves the process of collaborating with the actors who are going to play the roles. So it was a really enjoyable experience to kind of create and elaborate what was already amazing on the page.
I'm a fanboy of Alien, of Ridley Scott's universe, and it's one of the reasons I'm an actor and want to tell those kinds of stories.
You have reached your final destination.
My experience of doing futuristic films was down to space virgins on the planet Sex. It was a real learning curve.
I was watching a film called Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which I thought was particularly well done, the first one. So I was very interested in the director, but I was even more interested in the girl in the lead, who was Noomi Rapace. And I thought Noomi was particularly a combination of intelligence and physicality. That's very good. Yeah, back view.
Like this?
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, good butt. Okay, come around in front.
He just mentioned, by the way, that he was going to do like a prequel to Alien or some kind of prequel. And I was like, wow, fantastic. But I was like, I just kind of deleted that afterwards. I was like, that's never going to happen anyway. I was really kind of high after meeting him because he's just an amazing person and his presence is just so strong. So I was like, I called my manager. I was like, even if I never work with him, I'm happy because, you know, I had this hour with him.
She kind of really owned that part in Dragon Tattoo. And was surprised to find here was a very beautiful, very intelligent, very elegant woman. And so off that, we got off to a really good start.
The studio naturally knew Rapace at that point was not a big star. And so there was a lot of discussion and debate. So we did shoot a test ultimately, the studio requested. And partially there was also, from their standpoint, I would say legitimate question, you know, could she speak English?
Hello, Mr. Wayland. I'm Dr. Isabel Shaw.
And that was where the gang all got together for this first moment in the movie making, which was really exciting, with her and with Darius Wolski. And that was the first day Ridley and Darius had worked together, and you would have thought they'd worked together for 20 years.
We shot a 2-camera test that he just liked a lot, and that was it. It was kind of challenging because it was in the warehouse, there was no sets, nothing.
Arthur Max put together super simple. We used a Panavision storage room at Pinewood, but it gave it a kind of industrial, creepy vibe.
We just completely improvised something with whatever. I had some LED lights that later on became a whole theme of the film.
I need to know what that thing said to you before it ripped your head off.
Numi was great. She killed her scenes, and you saw the ferocity.
Don't talk about my father.
The power of her and her screen presence just kind of came out in them. And Fox, to its credit, decided to back Ridley's vision.
You said you could figure out their navigation.
There's a really interesting quality about her. There's a toughness there, but then there's a vulnerability to her, which I think, you know, Sigourney had in the first one, which was very interesting. You know, there's a sort of maternal sort of side to her, but then there's also this sort of, you know, warrior.
You can do whatever you need to do, huh? Everything.
With Numi, we were very fortunate, look-wise, that we could actually, because we had access to her a great deal, and she was very up for it. So we went through every single look.
I had many, many costume fittings. I need to be able to move and to be free at the same time, even though we need to have all this kind of equipment on.
We went through the futuristic look, we went through the Star Trek type of look, we went through diagonals, we went through Eastern looks. We basically came down, and she is the only one that is doing this, to her wearing a flight suit.
Don't photograph it from above, you're photographing it from here.
Yeah.
Photograph from here, right?
Yeah.
Because then it always looks a bit, so you're all, I'm looking down and you're like,
What you're doing wrong?
okay. There you go, that's
Ridley is very, you know, he has a very clear vision. When we're working, you know, with the scenes and with the costumes and every little detail, it's like he knows what he wants, but he's very open at the same time. So if I come up with something, he's always ready to kind of try that and think about it. And so it really felt like we were kind of finding her look together. At this mission, it's very practical. So I wanted to have like a hair that we didn't need to fix.
She hadn't done anything.
No.
So if we can, you know, get to that with the blonde one as well, that's really good.
I agree.
But it's kind of, the dark one makes it much, go straight into something that is quite close to me.
It's good.
And it's really the opposite to
Good for skin color.
Vickers, yeah.
So it was this like balance between finding something was quite soft, but not hardcore or boyish or masculine. And I've never been read, and Nana, the fantastic hairdresser we have, she brought like so many different wigs, and she had one red. I was like, wow, well, but maybe not. And Ridley saw it, and he was like, no, I don't think so, not red. And then we popped it on, and he was like, oh, wow, yeah.
The red looks really good.
Her whole persona with this red hair that she has is a completely different persona to had she been blonde. So it did have an impact. Just really more the linear function of her clothing. She's got long lines and she's got functionality, and she's basically a practical dresser.
Finding Holloway, I don't know why, it became quite difficult. So I took a long time casting him because he was so important and, you know, had to be the equivalent of Numi in a funny kind of way, believing that there could be a couple, both on level of intelligence, and that's got to be real. Finally, Avi Kaufman came up with this guy, Logan Marshall Green, a New York actor who'd only been doing stage at that particular moment. Done a couple of films prior to that, but mostly a stage actor.
I didn't know what I was getting into. I had auditioned with a scene in a Ridley Scott movie that was a science fiction. And so all I knew was that there was some interest in me, and you know, there was a chance I was going to be offered this opportunity. And I'm reading the script and I'm like, well, this is a pretty good script. I'm reading and I'm about at page 80. And I was like, oh, well, you know, I die. That's too bad, but I still want to keep reading. And then I get to about page 100 and I had to stop. I said, wait a minute, did I just read that correctly? It was just a moment looking out over the Hudson where I realized I was in an alien movie.
I met with him on a transatlantic Skype and liked what he had to say about it. Then he actually read on Skype. Then he was flown in to meet, and that was it.
I I didn't want to play him sick, you know, with the standard symptoms of being infected with some, you know, life form. I wanted it to come out in a way comically as well. I think we do, when we're sick, we fight against those symptoms of being down and depressed.
D-Mark!
It's okay, man. I love you, yo.
No, Charlie! No! No!
I had heard about this film and had actually talked to Ridley about it, just kind of knowing that I wasn't available to do it, but I was just really interested to hear what he was going to do. And I remember at a dinner, I'd kind of pitched the story to me, and I was really just so impressed by it. And then the film that I was supposed to do pushed, and Ridley found out about it. And I was traveling at the time, and he sent me the script, and I read it, and I came back to LA, and we got on the phone and had a really good discussion about it. And we just kind of built her that way, just kind of talking a lot. And I went to London and we sat down for a bit with him and with Damon the writer.
Vickers was a company person as well, who is kind of fundamentally isolated from the crew by her own makeup of who she is, and she's very much a company person. She lives in an apartment on board the ship, the Prometheus, which frankly could grace a Fifth Avenue apartment in New York.
The way we kind of set her up right from the beginning is that it's very clear and very evident that there's either an alternative agenda or there's something that is not truthfully being spoken about with her.
This is Vickers.
She's a bit of an enigma. She really, and I think that mystery was something that I really liked. This is a beautiful ensemble cast. And so you kind of trying to find the few elements in your character that kind of sets her apart from the rest. And I do like that she really is, in many ways, the character that kind of almost goes against or fights everything that everybody else is there to do and excited about.
What? I said, what are you doing? This is my ship, and I told you to take us home.
She is a witch. She's really the ice queen.
You are a terrible lay, by the way.
It had always been our vision to make her look as sculptural as possible. So a beautiful, beautiful silk mohair suit in ice silver was obviously the way to go.
I feel like so much of how I kind of build a character happens for me through wardrobe and hair and makeup. When she said, I want to build you the suit, I just kind of thought corporate suit. And what she ended up with was this incredible futuristic, it's like shark skin, silver, gray, shiny. The suit was fitted to an inch of my body. But there was something about putting the jacket on that almost like made me feel like I was throwing my back out, because when I put it on, it just kind of like sucked me into this posture that just became Vickers. And I would put this jacket on and it was just like Vickers just came alive.
14 Charlie, take 2. Aim up.
The male housekeeper on board the ship is called David. He is the creation of the Whaling Corporation. We don't hide the fact, because Alien 1, you know, had a character in there who was played by Ian Holm, and at that moment he was the hidden agenda of the company. So I thought, rather than hide the fact, it would be more fun while everyone's sleeping for this number of the distance that this ship will take. David will be there keeping an eye on things.
I'm king of the world.
One of the best actors we've got out there right now is Michael Fassbender. And I just said point blank, asked him, and he read the script and point blank said yes, and that was it. My only instruction to Michael, I think, was, I said, you know, in essence, you're a servant. So his combination of that massive mental capability at the same time as having to be servile gives rise for some actually pretty humorous, I think he's quite humorous.
What I was really wanted to work with David as well is the ambiguity about him. I want him to be like that guy that's so annoying, you know, it's like, is he taking the piss out of me or is he being for real? And I always want that, you know, it's like you don't know with him what's going on, you know, that sort of ambiguity I want to have with the audience as well, where they're not sure, you know. Is there an agenda? Is this robot got sort of, you know, human feelings? So just trying to sort of, you know, address all the areas correctly.
Michael Fassbender is one of the best actors I've ever worked with. He has an immediate access to things that takes, on a good day, hours for most actors, and you know, on a not so good day, months for other actors. He has just a real raw talent.
Got it? Genius. Back up. Action.
How long?
16 inches, fully erect. Varies when it's relaxed.
Let's get
Where would you
to it.
like me over here?
I'd like you to remove your pants first.
Certainly.
Make it quick.
The wires. The wires everywhere.
Got it.
Morning. There's a very easy sort of relationship on set. Everybody's having fun and sort of getting on with it.
Like, that thing does bypass surgery. What do you need it for? Bypass surgery?
There is a sort of, you know, young, fresh cast, but then, you know, we've also got, you know, heavy sort of, you know, Oscar winner sort of Charlize Theron, and she plays Vickers, who's like this cold-hearted bitch. And she's not very nice to David either. I don't think anyone really is. Basically wanted that sort of immaculate, sort of blonde, sort of side parting, and everything is so precise with him, you know, in terms of like his outfit. And Janty came up with a very sort of totalitarian, sort of almost fascist type sort of uniform, you know, where everything is just so and in place.
He was actually going to be barefoot because why would he need anything? But because of the line in the script that, you know, he gets into a spacesuit and he does conform to the normal human apparel, we just kept him down to very fine lines, very, again, the linear look, which matches his character, really. Just jackets that are all in one, trouble-free. And in the end, we used the flip-flop option.
I feel like most of the coolness of David really was evoked by Fassbender's previous work, as opposed to me saying this is what it's going to be, because him playing that role as a synthetic human just opened all these other creative doors and was just sort of the greatest thing ever. So it's almost like the words that are coming out of his mouth don't even feel like they're words that I wrote. They're just words that Fassbender was whispering in my ear as I was typing in my computer.
On Charlie, take 4.
I'm just a captain. Yannick, I'd worked with once before on American Gangster, Idris Elba. And Idris, I'd always admired his stuff. I need a strong guy, a guy who could fly the ship. I believe him, I buy him into being probably ex-pilot at some kind before he joined up with the Wayland Corporation, where he did a few long hauls. Fortunately for me, he said yes. So I was thrilled to bits, and he evolves right through the 3 acts. Finally, he turned himself into a bomb, which will bring down the juggernaut.
The set of characters in this film is kind of vast, you know. I think Ridley's put together an interesting set of cast. You watch these people, you believe them, and Ridley's very good at sort of directing these actors to seem like a team, or not.
Then you've got Rafe Spall and Sean Harris, 2 English actors who I was aware of their work. And, you know, they're just great guys. They make a great pair. I think, you know, they're going to be, again, bring a lot of sort of comedy element to the film. And also just the dynamic between them is very organic and very loose. And that's the great thing about Ridley, you know, he allows you to sort of go off page, stay on page, do whatever you want, really. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't, you know, and there's no pressure. Then we've got Kate Dickie, who is in Red Road. I saw her, she blew me away in that film.
Every morning we have to insert Michael Fassbender's head onto his body in order to get him to perform. Every night he goes home and his bloody head falls off.
I always forget my creator. Yeah, guy's blessed. I mean, we just sort of end up telling jokes all day.
Jackson.
Union. Hey, Union.
Bathing his feet, I think that was my most fun day.
3 Brazilian swimwear models. 2 pygmies waiting in your room, sir. As requested.
Only 2?
That's all I could find.
Like, I have the 2 pygmies and, you know, 3 Brazilian sort of swimwear models waiting in your room, sir. And he was like, only 2 pygmies. He's very easy to work with. He's a consummate professional. I mean, again, his work speaks for himself.
Meredith,
I've always despised that sarcastic attitude.
And I was so happy to get him. Guy can play anything. And why not have a seriously intelligent, genius, a man who's kind of a combination of, Edison, Bill Gates, and Steve Jobs.
He's the billionaire megalomaniac. He's a man who thinks outside of the square, and a lot of people do that in life, but a lot of people don't have the facility or the finance to be able to actually act on that. I believe that he feels that we've gotten so close, that we're getting closer, that it's actually possible to discover who it is that actually created us. The process that I had to go through was quite a lot of prosthetic makeup in order to look as old. It was basically around about the 100-year mark. So it was important to find a way to make that look as realistic as possible, which, the prosthetics team did an incredible job, but, it takes 5 hours in the makeup chair to sort of get it there.
I was a lot younger when I first sat down in this makeup chair. Just an indication of how bloody long we've been sitting here.
The difficult thing about playing somebody who's a lot older than yourself is that people know how old I am, they know what I look like, so there's always going to be scrutiny anyway.
I must hide myself away.
I remember sort of saying to Ridley, why aren't you just casting some old bloke? But it was important for him at the time to find somebody who sort of had a youthful quality, I suppose, that comes through.
And then once I talk about David being in the room, maybe I could wander forward.
But at the same time, manage something that was seemingly realistic.
May I rest in peace.
How I started with Prometheus was really by vast quantities of research, and it just all screamed to me, prototype, prototype, prototype as soon as possible. Ridley was quite adamant that he wanted to avoid the puffy spacesuit that is really a NASA spacesuit.
We can't be too bulky, it's got to be practical. They have to be athletic. By then, they won't be walking around in suits which are this fat and this thick to keep them warm. You'll have such an evolution of capabilities by then. They'll probably be skin tight.
He loved the skinny look of the NASA undersuits, which in the 60s was silver. And he loved that look, the very linear look. It was more interesting, really, more technical. And plus it gave the actors a lot more chance to be mobile. Under the spacesuit, which has basically 2 layers, there is a neoprene undersuit.
Action!
And it's a form of a biosuit. Airprene, which is a neoprene which breathes, so the actors will never get hot. And we were able to buy this amazing neoprene from Taiwan with a beautiful pattern on it. And then all the tubes that monitor the blood, that monitor the oxygen levels, that monitor your heart rate, were attached in an orange tubing around the body. And so it's quite a thing of beauty.
Action!
I was so excited because the neoprene ones are the ones with all the orange, the rubber ones, and they don't get seen that often because they're supposed to go under our blue. And they're just beautiful, moulded, amazing.
I figured by then, you'll put a bubble on your head. Why are you going to create a helmet where you've got blind spots? That's ridiculous. When you want to do that, you really want a globe, and because the plastic by then will be absolutely bulletproof. You're going to have a helmet which has no blind spots at all. And in that helmet, they've got video screens this big, like postage stamp, each one works. So in there, he can look at, 5 feet in millimeter. If they want to talk to him, you can glance at him, see them. Around his neck will be all his technology, which will be whispering in his ear all the time.
To start with the helmet, the globe was very specific to Ridley's design, which is egg-shaped, which is more oval than any other globe or dome that I've seen on a helmet before. And integral into that helmet are 9 working video screens, X amount of tech being played on them.
What we've got here is kind of basic shells being fitted up with their internal dashboards and LCD screens and all the associated electronics that drive the screens in here, the screens up in the domes.
There is lighting to suit our lighting cameraman so he can light the face. So that was batches of LEDs that had to be installed.
Also, there are some effects we can have on there to mimic the flickering of the screens on their faces.
There's the air, which is run on 2 fans with battery packs in the backpack.
They blow up air into the sort of globe, so you don't die.
They're wired for sound and mic'd.
Our atmosphere. David, I'm telling you, I'm not walking around with this thing on my head anymore.
Charlie, please don't do this, please.
In this movie, there is quite a corporate presence of the Wayland logo. We've used it on every single piece of metal that might be on the armour. It's even on the boots. They have Wayland logo t-shirt issue. That's just part of the stock from the spacecraft. They also have trousers that are very overstitched, and they have jackets which have a lot of overstitching. The background of the Prometheus patch is based on Prometheus, the fallen angel, and he has his wings outspread and he's looking out into the universe, hoping to get back.
Something's manufacturing breathable air down there. That, mate, is terraforming.
No. The bet was why we came here.
It really was a great group. Fassbender's a genius. I mean, I've worked with a couple of actors this year, and Fassbender just is extraordinary. Numi was fantastic, really lovely, incredibly down-to-earth. Charlize was hilarious. She kept talking about winning an Oscar all the time.
You get to kind of live this gypsy life with a bunch of strangers, and there's something really amazing in that if you can find that, you know, and enjoy that.
Every set you see in the movie was being prepared on a rolling basis. And for a movie of this scale and this level of design, that was terrifying.
You walk onto a set, you know, and the set's there, it's there, and you know, it's not a green screen or anything, it's literally there, and you know you've just walked onto that set, and that is absolutely, that's alien, you're on an alien environment.
The one thing that sort of did blow me away immediately are the sets on this film, and I've definitely never been on any sets like it before, and I don't think I will in the future.
Ridley's decision to kind of do everything practical and build like the greatest alien playground in the world, it really makes the movie feel like it's a companion piece to the earlier movie, because that's how he made Alien.
These things were over 40 feet high. Some of the sets were 300 feet long.
The set is the proscenium. When they walk on in the morning, the importance of costume, the importance of the set, the importance of the environment, I think, is everything. England was the attractive place because it was 20% on spend, so it's a great tax rebate. You're still working with the same, you know, talented artisans, chippies, carpenters, highly skilled plasterers, highly skilled painters. The whole team there, the whole bag of goodies when you go to England is, I would think now, the best in the world. Anyway, always covering all categories and all trades. It's where trade passes into art. And also working with the English crews is kind of nice, you know, it's good fun.
Have a cup of tea, just keep the operators here.
We ended up in Pinewood, which is, that said, is I've never worked on this since I did Legend. So we had the Bond stage, which of course is 40% longer than H stage at Shepperton. So I fundamentally booked the Bond stage for 10 months. and 5 other stages. So we had, and we also had the backlot. Enough of a backlot to do some pretty marvelous stuff from the belly of the Prometheus. You've got this garage which lowers itself down. It's like almost hangar size, out of which the ATVs come and the buses, which take our people onto the planet, and everything else was a green screen.
We were greenlit basically at the end of October, and we were shooting at the end of 3rd week of March with nothing built, 0. We had designed a lot, so that's great, but we had built nothing. Because we only had that 5 months, it was a madcap process where every set would be done, struck, and we'd start the next one and have that ready 5 or 6 days prior and on to the next. So for a massive epic movie like this, it was done with a degree of factory precision that was remarkable.
Our actual prep time from when we got the actual go-ahead to filming was short for this scale of film, so we were having to get it all done under a huge pressure of time. Also here in London, it's very, very busy. Stage space availability was not good for us, so every stage we've worked on has not had to just work for 1 set. It's at a minimum had to work for 2 and often had to work for 3.
The Bond stage is the biggest stage in Europe. Still wasn't big enough for us because we had a lot to get into it. And so we decided to extend it by about another 1/3 as long.
This is one of those sets where size does matter. And I'm sure Ridley would say it's big, but it's not big enough.
We had a lot to get into it. We built a roof over the entryway and create a stage within a stage. That's because we had to combine the interior of the pyramid structure. We had to have chambers and corridors suggesting that scale, combined with the interior of the Juggernaut, which is basically a ship similar to the crashed derelict ship, the Croissant ship of the first movie.
Additional 150 feet was very beneficial because that's the entrance to this cave.
We had to be very careful about how we use this space because there was never going to be enough space because the Juggernaut was enormous in scale compared to the Prometheus, more than twice as big. And so we had to figure out how we could combine with digital extension and 3D modeling, how we could create that sense of scale.
I designed the Bond stage with Arthur as a massive complex. From the minute you walk into what I'd describe as the hives, they're kind of domes. And because I was always going for scale, everything was big. So the Bond stage was chock to chock, it was jammed.
We've got 4 or 5 big sets, all vying for space. There is no space left in there. There's barely enough space for the crew.
Rolling.
We're always fighting each other, trying to find a little corner to put a certain monitor, a little corner to put your table full of equipment.
Let's start getting everybody out the way who doesn't need to be here.
The first set that I went on to was the interior of the ship, of the Prometheus. So the science lab had been built in a number of corridors, and I walked into Video Village and Ridley was just sitting there with 3D glasses on, and there were 6 HD screens. Each one of them had a different sort of camera, and I looked at them and I was like, oh my God, like, this is actually happening.
Walking around the spaceship, feel like you're walking on a spaceship. The art department and the carpenters and all the guys that have, put the work in have done a really stunning job.
The first day we walked onto set, I think there was a mutual feeling of we were on the ship, and you've all seen the films, so it was kind of daunting.
We're about to do the first take, and we're now about to do the prequel of Alien.
And action.
But after that first scene, everyone establishes who they are, and we just kind of get on with it.
He chose a scene where we would all just woken up out of 2 years out of hypersleep, so we're all a bit spaced out anyway, so I guess that really worked. And in some respects, we didn't really know each other as well, so, you know, the way he planned it was perfect.
Okay.
How's the seat taken?
And that was thrilling because, you know, for all of us who have grown up with Alien and the idea of working with Ridley Scott, and then to come onto the set on the first day and to be on the spaceship was like unbelievable. So there was like 15 of us, and he just wanted to do a thing where we were all like queuing up and getting our food, and he was like, okay, no rehearsal, let's just get 3 cameras on this, see what happens.
My fingers are still numb. And then I've never been out this long before, so...
No one's been out that long before.
Right.
And that was thrilling. That was like, yeah, man, we're in the Alien film. You know what I mean? This is Ridley. You know, so that was really, really cool and exciting. And that was the first day. It was brilliant.
Got it? Got it?
We broke for lunch, and Michael Ellenberg said to me, let's go over to one of the other stages where essentially they had built, in the script it was originally called the ampule room. There's no green screen, they just built it. This entire stage had basically been transformed into an alien world.
I got tears in my eyes. I was like, wow, because it's almost like a piece of art. With sci-fi movies, and it's out in space, and a lot of technique, and you can kind of lose the beauty, and you can kind of lose reality. But I think Ridley is totally unique. The whole design and the costumes and everything is really beautiful in a very cruel way. And it helps me so much because you don't have to pretend then. It's a short way into it.
You better take 3.
Stop. Don't touch it.
Ampules come alive in the middle of the set. We're going to do a dozen that actually are practical and not a visual effect. And it's basically cornstarch and water with a vibration underneath it. Inside you've got a container that's going to have the fluid in it that distributes it from the middle container out to the outside, and that comes from a large reservoir offset. The cover goes on the top, and at a certain point, to the director's discretion, a little air ram pushes the lid up a little bit, and black fluid will ooze down the side as well as the effect that you've got on the top of the ampule.
We built more set than you might build normally because I think it worked out economically better than actually saying, well, let's have this green screen, we can do everything digitally. Digitally is not cheaper.
No, that could take one, Marker?
Sometimes you can see the wires, you know, you can see the science fiction in a lot of movies that are made today because the actors are doing it in front of a green screen and they don't, as much as they're being told what is happening around them, you know, they're not attaching the thought to that environment.
I mean, they're acting in a void, which I think is always horrendously difficult, both for the actor as well as the director.
See, Mark?
In this case, we have the luxury of everything is there on the day, and we can attach the thought to exactly what's going to be seen.
For an outsider to look at the way we make the movie would be pretty comical. You've got a 7'6" guy covered in red dots, you know, and it's purely so that they can track him and create the computer-generated version of it later. But at least we have something practical to play with on a day, and that's great for us. It's much better than, you know, having to just imagine everything.
It's the terrible twins. Wow.
Just relax.
Intimidating, right?
I'm going to make you,
Hello.
Hi, Billy Props.
Garden lubrication as well.
Yeah.
Pay no attention to what's going on there.
Yes, just fixing your testicle.
Perfectly normal.
The luminosity is great, isn't it? The
I love
luminous
that.
skin. It's got the veins are painted in, it's beautiful.
Ridley seems to like very much the idea of building it and having it there, so everything is sort of viable. The texture of everything is there to touch, to sort of interact with. That's one thing, sort of watching him, you can see that the texture and the feel of things is very important to him.
Do we need this many people here, guys? No. Get behind the cameras. Move. Anyone not doing anything, move down that corridor.
Where's a gap that I can go in?
Holes all over, just keep prodding.
You're getting to see real live things in front of you, and things like the head exploding when we, you know, take an engineer's head back and we open it up and it turns out that that's not his head. We open it up and inside is this head. Well, I thought on the day that they would say, OK, now you're going to imagine this, but the whole animatronics department, so this head was literally twitching and mouth shaking and blood oozing and veins throbbing. And so as an actor, it's a dream because you just can react to what's in front of you.
That shook you, didn't it?
That looks brilliant.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Never ending with these fucking doors.
Everything we've created, from the large trucks, the spacesuits, everything is kind of research and development on the job. There's nothing that existed beforehand. Everything's been generated from scratch, from Ridley's imagination, from a set of drawings. So there was nothing tried and tested.
There were occasional problems with the spacesuit and helmet in the early days.
I hate this fucking helmet.
Charging all of this enormous amount of tech was an endless job. These 9 screens would go down, or they'd fuse the lights, or the top light. Something would never, ever, ever be 100%.
15, 14, 13. 16.
Come on!
15.
10 seconds track. You're going to say now.
Ridley's a great innovator, but a lot of it is on the moment. He suddenly sees something, and that creates an idea in his head, and he suddenly wants that, and it's reacting. It's reacting to the speed at which Ridley wants to shoot. Is probably the biggest challenge, and he keeps every department on their toes.
Neil, have you got a Wagner on a stick? Yeah.
Ridley is a force to be reckoned with. He has the most amazing enthusiasm for what he's doing. The crew are infected with that enthusiasm, and everybody goes along for the ride, and he keeps everybody at it all day long.
His approach with Darius was to basically not alter their approach. That's not to say they didn't consider 3D and it didn't change certain camera shots and designs and things that they chose to do to take full advantage of it, but it's to say they didn't limit themselves by it.
Shooting 3D and seeing 3D on the experience on the floor with these big monitors, where in my little tent I'd have 3 or 4 big 3D monitors. So it's real time shooting 3D. And then when I'm editing, I'm actually editing 3D. So I don't know what the problem was. It helped having Darius Wolski.
What's necessary for 3D is that when you have 4 rigs, I had to have an instant switch to watch 8 cameras, which is left, eye, right of every rig at every time. 2D, because that monitors my lighting and monitors if the lenses are in focus. Then all this stuff has to be rigged to the stereo card, and then everything has to be fed back to the video playback, and that has to come back to 2 big 3D monitors that Ridley's watching next to me. And 4 2D monitors, he can watch 4 cameras at the same time, but also he can switch from one camera to another. So that requires a lot of cable and a lot of very, very, very intricate wiring.
It looks like a bad Heath Robinson, dodgy lash-up. This guy couldn't make his mind up when he was doing this thing, could he, right? So.
The 3D element is a big factor. It's a more complicated process, it's a slower process. So to try and make the film in the same timetable as you would ordinarily make a normal film is a huge challenge in the first place.
The end results that Ridley and Darius are getting are absolutely amazing. So I think it's been worth the effort, but I would say it adds 15-20% more time to your schedule, even with the director who likes to move as fast as Ridley.
Clear the door, please. Thank you very much.
Some of the sequences we've been doing with windstorms, with creature effects, they're always going to you know, make your day go in a difficult way. You can't guarantee anything. You've got almost 3 times as many technicians as you would ordinarily have, and Ridley likes to shoot with 3 or 4 cameras simultaneously, so you're in small sets with a lot of cameras taking up a lot of spaces. Twice as many people manning them, 3 times as many people if you include the guys at the back with the stereography machines. So it's a lot more noise.
Quiet! Please! Shut up! Rehearsing and action!
And every time you think you're ready, almost always there's a problem with one of the 3 or 4 rigs that are working.
John, if you hold that there, just hold that so you don't shoot when you lift it.
Sometimes the cameras can be a bit temperamental, so sometimes we can lose a bit of time during the day because of that.
I think the biggest surprise in a really pleasurable way for them was that when they were doing big vistas and big landscapes, the 3D was fine. But where they really were excited by it, and really I think it started to change sort of some of their choices in the movie, was in the smaller, more intimate scenes and the interiors of the ship, because it opened up sets, it gave them a lot of different options to play with, and it obviously gave them the opportunity to make the scares that much bigger and pop that much more, because that's where you're looking to add dimensionality when you're in these small confined spaces. So that's where he felt like it really opened up and the 3D did something truly three-dimensional that you wouldn't get otherwise.
The biggest challenge was our wind test, when all cameras shut down. It was the scariest moment in the world. Our concern first was stability of the mirror with all these huge readers 3 feet away. Then cameras were shutting down, but we've learned it was just basically because we were using plugs that they had a little bit of play. So back to the drawing board, cut all the cables, changed the plugs. Madness.
When you have the hologram, is it going to be more spectacular with a low-key light, a glowing hologram? Oh, now I love this light.
When you work with Ridley, I mean, images are three-dimensional. They always were. I mean, look at Blade Runner. I mean, it was a three-dimensional film. Some people shoot two-dimensional films, but he always shot three-dimensional movies. That there is a depth, that there is, you know, there's a shadow, there's a light. You create dimensions in a lot of different ways. You know, there's, what, 2,000 years of visual arts tradition.
I would actually just clear the corridor, yes, and just move around the bend.
Barry, let's start with turning this one up.
When you go to spaces, you know, like to Juggernaut, and then you try to create light that is as invisible as possible. So just basically we've done a lot of stuff just with flashlights, just with lights in helmets, and there was a constant battle of pushing each other because he used to say, just turn the lights off, let's do the flashlights, you know. So I said, great, I'm first for it, I'm game. But then, can I see the faces? Trying to invent invisible light that you actually register the faces when you need it. And that just took the courage from both of us, you know, how far you push it, where you back off, where you create a little light so you can just understand the story, and when you just turn them off, you know. It's a constant creative process. It's not like we're gonna sit down, so we're gonna do this, 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 and this. So it's constant reinventing the thing. Every day is new. He questions everything.
Which is better?
Now stay where you are.
So Jared, here's the question. Is it better there, or is it worth doing this?
Very golf, take one, aim up.
Darius is lighting it beautifully as well, so it's, you know, that's the other thing when you're working, you know, on a Ridley Scott film. I mean, the talent on set is pretty breathtaking, really. I mean, in all departments, you know, everyone's at the top of their game, and it's great to be able to come to work and just learn so much, you know, from just watching all the various departments, you know, going about their business.
There's a scene when we're on the ship and we're watching the screens, and there's something pretty intense happening on those screens, and I'm sure a lot of directors would have just, you know, saved the hassle and said, okay, on this screen that's happening, so just do it. But he's put together this series of animated shots almost of moments in the film, and they look incredible. It's basically the film but animated.
He creates an environment where, as an actor, you have so many tools. It was the scene where I'm watching my father go out into space and get killed, and it's supposed to play on this screen. It's just like a glass screen in front of me. But I was like, when are we shooting? Like, when are we getting to it? And The second AD was like, Ridley's still just trying to get some of the images for you so that we can throw it on the monitor for you to really see. And I was just like, who does that? So many other directors would just be like, this is your job. Like, bring me emotion. Like, your father is dying. There it is. Imagine. And he made a real effort to get as much of this animated footage of the sequence, to have that actually there on the day for me to kind of respond to.
Bring him around, take a closer look. That's what I'm going to use for my point of entry.
Yannick's ship has this airlock, which, you know, easily could have been done in green screen on a stage, but Ridley has built it, and it makes a world of difference. Like, I'm looking at this thing like, wow.
Yeah. Get ready and action.
What Ridley often talks about is it's not as though movies became three-dimensional the moment there was a 3D camera. That's ludicrous. No one goes to the movie theater thinking they're watching something flat. It works, and the better filmmaking works because you enter a world. You've always done that. That's always been part of what real filmmaking is about.
It's in such a big scale. There's so many technical things going on. There's so much stuff to deal with, but he doesn't miss anything, any detail.
Ridley is so intent on making this script great, and he has cast people who he hopes will help him. He just wants you to help him make a great movie. He's really hoping you will help flesh out the script and these characters and choreograph this dance with him that will be the best it can be, not just what he wants it to be.
This will be a hologram.
3, 2, 1, action. Cut and reset it.
Once contaminated, they are lethal killing machines, nearly all of them. One could consider to be no more than survival. Confronted in a situation, any one of these aliens has a survival instinct, and its survival instinct is to rid itself of the enemy before it.
The engineer in particular, Ridley was adamant about being absolutely perfect.
You know, less is always better in these instances. Today, the makeup has even improved dramatically, but above all things, you can also redraw things digitally.
There's the Ridley factor, which is where Ridley will just come in and just throw a curveball, if you would call it that, and say, just grab that, do this, do that, and it will look great. And it goes against all of our plans, and we think that, you know, you sit there and think, crikey, you know, yeah, and then you look at it on the monitor and it looks incredible.
One department would tackle the, let's say, the engineers and what everything applied to them, and the other side would be more the monsters.
The mechanical team is interesting on this because digital technology is obviously stunning. If you can imagine it, you can almost do it now. But I think that Ridley has put an onus on trying to do everything practical. It was kind of a reawakening, I think, of a lot of skills that were maybe starting to being pushed away, that what we call cable technology, which is where things are moved with cables and servo motors and all those sort of things. And so we're kind of going back and pulling those skills back, and I think that's everybody's kind of enjoying that, really. Things kick off for us, in a sense, with the ampule room. As soon as the ampules begin to bleed and begin to sweat and the DNA is released, that starts life as little tiny, almost eel-like elements. That then takes us to what we call the hammerpede, and I think, again, his name was never really resolved. Centipede, hammerpede.
We'll show you. I like the material. What's that? You've got Fifield and Milburn in their scene in what we call the headroom, where they experience these quite large reptiles. I don't mean that. I'm saying they dig out a way and land around the front of the worm.
Now, go down.
That's good, and swim away. That's a cut he's going to open up.
Okay.
That's what we're doing. So I'm going to...
To me, they were great aliens. They start life as being almost sort of, you know, placid little things.
Oh, hey. Hey, baby.
We took a week to shoot that, and just me, Sean and Ridley on this extraordinary set with these animatronics and like 5 different snakes and a fake arm and this whole team behind this whole thing. It was just a thrill. It's the sort of thing that when you're 5 and you think, I want to be an actor, it's the sort of thing you imagine that you would do.
You ready? And tighten. Whoa. Wow. Help me.
Move around.
And grab it. Straighten out, break the arm. Break the arm.
Yeah.
Then fuck. Right? 2 moves.
All right, now,
3's too many.
He's always been a very hands-on, practical kind of director. So if you've got some kind of creature that's wrapping around an arm, he doesn't want to just give up and let it be a pure visual effect.
Tighten. Do it. No. Don't be subtle.
Okay, let's just wrap that round his arm and just pull it tight, you know, just do it. And he's like, great, really? You know, and it's, yeah, there it is, it's great.
The reptiles get onto Milburn's arm and actually, in effect, by just sheer leverage, snap his arm.
To break Milburn's arm, it's an old gag. Rafe puts his arm behind his back to hold a strap, which gives us a shoulder. We took a cast of his shoulder to make a cup, and to that we created a mechanical arm. His elbow joint is a cable-operated mechanism, and so is the wrist and the fingers. But the overall movement is through a rodded system. So there's a person behind Rafe, tight in against his back, who's operating this movement. And on top of that was a track which allowed the hammerpede to curl around his arm.
Oh no, he's got silicone on his helmet.
Quick wipe on the front of Sean's helmet. That's it, thank you. And rolling.
Somebody needs to clean Sean's helmet.
Keep the cameras rolling.
Okay. Oh my god.
B marker.
Okay, you need to fucking stay calm, okay? Okay, just be calm and put your hand underneath the thing.
I don't want to touch it.
Touch the thing, man, for God's sake. You're making it worse, for God's sake, fuck you. Okay, be calm. Pull it out. Pull it out. It's breaking my arm. It's breaking my arm.
In the snapping of the arm, he's screaming for Fifield to cut it off. So it's about that thick. He gets his knife from his suit, cuts it off, and immediately is sprayed with acid.
As we shot that sequence, the mood sort of changed as the sequence unfolds. Yeah, they're in a bad place.
I'll tighten it when I put my arm up. I can't keep it up.
Yep. Here we go, we're rolling, and action.
Cut it off! It's broken my arm! Oh my god! Oh shit! Oh my god!
It melts through his helmet. He goes down, face down in the black goop, and the other half reforms its head and goes inside the suit and attacks Milburn from inside the suit, getting inside his face helmet.
I had to do the live cast, which is sort of a strange mix of being unpleasant and pleasant at the same time. Because if you could sort of breathe through it, because it is, you know, someone wraps a load of shit around your head, it's pretty weird.
Somebody's pleasant. No, it's not pleasant, but this is all eaten away.
Expedition team find my body the next day. They turn it over, and the big snake comes out my mouth. But Ridley didn't tell the actors that was going to happen.
3, 2, 1.
Okay, with lots of glue. Yeah. Now I'll shoot it like that, where they all go separate you. By the way, do not tell her what's going to happen. Sure. You're going to get one shot. Don't anyone tell her he's dead. You're not going to tell us tonight. She's going to go and have a look.
Don't show them the storyboards.
No. Just say, well, something like that.
Everybody hear that? Don't let any actors see the storyboards today, guys.
Kate had no idea that that was going to happen.
He just said, right, we're going to roll on this, go and turn over his body, something might happen.
And it's horrific. He's been literally eaten away. He's this massive hole, kind of his mouth filled with broken teeth. I mean, it was gross, really, genuinely gross.
We had the handpede on the end of a wire, a monofilament wire. It was loaded into a dummy of Milburn that was rolled over. So one would think, okay, there's something fishy, literally, going on here. There's a wire going from somewhere.
3, 2, 1, pull.
We were on an intercom to Ridley, and he was watching the monitor, and kind of, there's that weight.
Just at that point, I think I see a movement in his throat, so we kind of go in to see what it is. And this thing, I mean, literally, about that, like, leaps out. I mean, I literally screamed the place down, genuinely terrified. Even though in your head, you know, there's tricks going on and it's all happening, it was so set up so amazingly.
Firefield's interesting because Fifield was considered to be something that was the midpoint between the Deacon at the end and the Hammerpede. Something's happened to him and it has begun to transform, and we went through numerous designs for Fifield.
Then it's when you get the jaw working with, like, the sharp, which will unhinge from here.
Originally it was going to be a CGI thing, wasn't going to be me at all. But as the weeks went on, we started to think, well, maybe it's better if it's an acting thing. So we started to do some tests, just physical work, and we filmed some stuff. Ridley saw it and kind of liked it.
What was interesting was that Sean Harris is such a superb actor. The general feeling was that it would be much better to hold on to the actor's features, hold on to all of the things that he would bring to the show, but to begin to show almost really that he was heading towards the engineer that we see on the inspection table on the table when the head explodes, that ultimately that is going to be, that's going to happen to Fifield at some point. Whatever was happening to that engineer is now happening to Fifield. His head is becoming horribly contorted. He is losing himself to the alien within him. The Medpod creature is a combination of the DNA that is infected, that Holloway becomes infected by, and Shaw.
When it gets to a point where she realizes that she is literally impregnated by Holloway with a very unusual embryo, so she has to go into this Medpod and give herself to this machine to create and do a cesarean.
Before I start a movie, I prepare and I think and I do all my kind of homework, my brain work, and then when we actually step into the actual work and the scenes, it's more emotional and physical. That's my way of letting go of control.
So he's extracted out to there.
Yeah.
You'll be in there. You'll be in there, and then something will come in. It was pre-visualized, and it was a sequence that everybody involved used that shot-by-shot methodology in order to be able to do it, because there's an enormous amount of technology having to be laced through in order to be able to do that, because we didn't want to do rod removal or anything. We wanted to try and just shoot the whole thing for real. I think a squid, certainly from the mechanics of how we built him, the tentacles were based, movement was based on that. I think the animation of the previs was tremendous as far as giving him character.
Action and scanner.
First, I was actually on the table and I was using my own stomach to kind of move it in a very weird, blowing it up and kind of using them, my muscles in my belly to kind of move it in a weird way. And first they kind of planned to do that with my dummy, but when Ridley wanted me to try things, he was like, oh, that's really disgusting. You're quite good at this, let's do this.
Stomach.
Come on, get it out!
there is the point in which we need to, we need to cut into Numi's body. We need to actually perform the cesarean. So we life cast Numi in the position that she will be in at the moment.
Right, so that's the neutral position.
And from that create a silicon dummy, which is painted and textured to look exactly like her.
We can get these arms down, she can use her real arms and be reacting. And
That's actually a good old classic movie trick, which is that it was Numi's head and the body of a dummy.
I was kind of sitting in a very weird position with people under the table doing things, between my legs.
Above her is an arch which we mechanised using cable controls. Cable controls being that they go to levers, and by actuating a lever, you can move something at the other end. We were able to bring that arm above, lower it down, and grab hold of the embryotic sac and then draw it back up.
keep going up, keep going up, keep going up. Get your hands away.
Lose it for a second. Head back, come back, come back again, and lose it again, come back. Cut it. Very good.
Once we'd taken it out of her and it was dangling from the arm, waiting to be born, as it were, or freed, that was achieved by bursting that sac. Actually, it was burst using a very, very sharp razor, which will have been removed in post-production. And that allowed the sac to instantly burst and spew all of this sort of fluid. The first thing we had to do is to get the creature inside. And to get the creature inside, we had to roll it up in a certain way. It was a little bit like origami. We had to find the right way to fold him so that we could guarantee that on every shot he would look the same. That was then introduced into the condom, and then into the condom we then added the fluid and all the other little bits of skin and everything else. At the same time, we had to continue to draw on the condom and get it as tight as we could. The tighter it was, the more violently the release, and more beautiful it was. You could the condom becomes completely clear with liquid. You could then see the creature sort of wallowing inside this fluid.
I think you need more of these, and then if this will just stick to it, so then you're going to lay liquid on it. I think there's something before it comes out. Yeah.
I get him out, and there's a moment when I feel like this thing is looking at me. And I realized, like, okay, you want me dead.
I think as Ridley described it, was that having been born and extracted, at the point in which she screams, he realised he's an unwanted child.
John Hurt got off lightly, didn't he?
They've done such an amazing job, so it felt, I almost started to believe in the situation and forgot that I was hanging in a very weird situation with my feet down there. I saw my feet, on the dummy, and I was like, why can't I move my feet? Because it really felt like me.
I think I had my hand on her breast, and I was sort of hand on breast talking to Numi, and someone in the monitor shouted, this isn't right. This really isn't right. And then you realise when you look at the monitor that actually it didn't look right at all. Inside all the tentacles it's a series of discs, and each stage has a number of cables, normally 4, that give it left, right, up and down motion. So by stacking them together, you can get what's called an S shape or a complete curl. So all in all, there was about, I would have thought, 60 or 70 cables running to the tentacles through the body of the creature. They were connected to a series of servo motors. The servo motors replace the human operators, and the whole system is then operated through a remote control system, effectively a number of joysticks using what we call electronic expression makers, allows 1 or 2 people to mix all of those motors together in a predetermined fashion, so that when they move the joystick in one particular way, they'll get one expression. When they move it in another, they'll get another. And by moving between those different motions, you can get a whole array of different sort of activities out of the creature. The big decision is, blood is red, obviously. Do you go red? As soon as you go red, then the blood stakes immediately go much, much higher than if you choose an alternative colour. If we use ambers, we use milky solutions, all of those things can be quite off-putting, are obviously unpleasant, but it's not bleeding. So we decided we'd take two approaches with Ridley. One was that everything we did as an amber or a milky or a clear take, and then we'd have our second version, which was blood red. And in many ways with blood, you can never not have enough.
Spray water.
Pull the umbilical out, somebody. Pull the umbilical out.
Everybody gets excited when blood comes on the set. The whole picture of the set builds up. And I think that you get one or two conservative takes and then you open up the floodgates and you just keep going until Ridley's happy that, you know, he's completely, you know, doused everything and everybody.
It's the most aggressive scene in the movie, and it's fundamentally a real cesarean, and you see pretty well everything.
But it was really hard. I was quite empty after the week, and we did that for a week, and it really got into me. I was dreaming really weird nightmares.
Round of applause for Jimmy. You're on there next, Max. Get your trousers off. Yeah.
I said to Ridley the week after, I was like, I never thought that it could be so fun, in a way, to do this really sick scene.
Prosthetics in this, the makeup in this, absolutely phenomenal. I've never seen makeup like it that was applied to the engineers.
The engineers were, you know, Ridley was really demanding a very high standard, and we developed a technique of prosthetic application probably about 7 or 8 years ago, which has led to the ability to actually do these kind of prosthetics and do them pretty quickly. So 4 hours to get the engineer ready is very quick. We've been using a guy who's 7'2" for the majority of the film, the engineer that they awaken. We've really refined the prosthetics down to make them very beautiful and very unusual looking, and it's not something that you hit straight away. You know, you have to keep going back and working on it. So again, our process allows us to do that. So we can make something, mold it, cast it, test it. If it needs refining, then we can go back and refine it without having to start again. So it's allowed us to sort of tweak it and perfect things, and that's all we've done. We've just made it as perfect as possible.
The silicone prosthetic application takes about 4 hours. And then I have to get into the costume, which is a two-piece costume, legs and arms and torso. That's all zipped up, and then I'm glued into the hands and the neck and the feet. So altogether it's about 5 hours.
We produce master copies of the modelling in a hard form, and then we can re-engineer it. So with that hard form we can go back, we can polish everything. We've probably had a team of fabricators working on the thing for 6 months. You know, they have worked out the best possible design to create a perfect movement, ease of getting it on. It's got to be, you want to be able to get it off. We looked into incorporating cooling elements into them, but the particular guy, Ian White, that we're using is very used to wearing suits.
Welcome to my life.
The surface of the suit is transparent, so it's got like a translucent layer like skin. So that would be the difference between the stunt suit and the hero suit. The stunt suit would be more painted. The hero suit actually had a cast skin, transparent skin over it, which gave it a lot of depth and made it look quite sort of squid-like.
Ian and John did a fantastic job. I thought, I was very impressed. And just his movements as well. They were very specific, and he really got into the part.
The Trilobite as an animatronic character would have been possible, but it would have been an enormously complicated, enormously difficult thing to have shot. And in some ways, there's no point. When, you know, in a bygone time when there were no alternatives, then that would have been the route forward. But now with CG, I think we all chose early on that this was a character that would be fantastic in CG. So we only took the design to a point of reference, really, a finished point of reference, but we didn't go into the finer details of things like certain elements that existed on the tentacles, which would have been brought to life in CG later, opening up and seeing all the textures inside them. We didn't do that. We chose a much more sort of neutral look to it, but took it from the 2D right the way to a full sculpt, through the moulding processes and right the way through to a finished artworking character. It was posable and movable, and we did use it in a few shots. But its real purpose, I think, was to serve as a lighting and visual textual reference for CG to take on and take from there.
Okay, bring that one in round. Perfect. And the next one. And then I grab him. Feet in. No, you've got it. So do what we did before, right? Yeah. Okay. Then we go through, step through it, keep going. Now we go down.
What we had originally thought was that maybe for the sequence with the engineer's fight with the trilobite, that we could use elements of the trilobite for the actor and the stunt guy to sort of work with.
And action! Hello? Right, okay. Now, right, we need to lock this door off, knocker somehow.
As Shaw's being attacked by the engineer, the trilobite is clearly becoming aware of something happening behind the door, and we were using sound effects, I suppose, as well as some visual effects, shadow effects, as well as the odd glimpse of a tentacle passing across a window or something like that. So that would have been us in the background, effectively, in the next room, bashing tentacles against the door.
That's pathetic. And again, hit it hard. You're missing the fucking glass. Come on. Ready?
Thanks.
That's a good one, okay? All right. And do it again. One more, last one. That's it.
The Medpod creature that came from Shaw and Holloway has grown. It's impregnated the engineer and mixed the DNA of the engineer with that of the trilobite. Gives us what we call the Deacon. We started to sculpt that as a full-size sculpt. It stood about 4 feet tall. We built two versions of him. We built one version which went inside the sack, which was born out of the engineer, and a second version which was what we call a rod puppet. So the sequence begins with the engineer lying on the ground, dead. The trilobites crawled away and died somewhere in the corner. And the creature begins to sort of want to liberate itself. So the whole heaving of its body on the ground was the first sign. So we built a full-size engineer, and he was an animatronic. Everything is weighted and everything is jointed so that it will only move in the way that we would move. So he was a heavy lump on the ground. When the Deacon is born from the engineer, he's still connected to him with his umbilical. So the umbilical passes from the stomach of the Deacon through the embryonic sac into the body of the engineer.
And then slip, Rachel, slip. Okay, and again, try again. Yeah, go. Okay, keep that head down, keep the head down a bit. Yeah, elbows in. And up. No, and up. Open the mouth. Go, Steve. Go on. Turn. Go. Excellent. Oh, brilliant.
We shot that sequence a couple of times. We shot him rearing up almost to a stand to get to the next cut. It always amazes me what I'm looking at when you're shooting something to what you can see on the monitor. The genius that sits between the two is amazing. It's fantastic to see the playbacks. Because CG is such an all-consuming technology, I think that previous projects, it was more about being able to support the CG and just fill in the little gaps. Whereas on this one, it was very much a case of, we can do it without CG.
I think with any prosthetic is that you've always got to work with the person that's underneath. You've got to preserve the actor, and they've got to be able to act.
One of the ingredients that made this project so enjoyable for me was to work with a group of people that came onto the project with wide-eyed, full of enthusiasm, just, thankful for being part of what was, a piece of their movie history, and just welded the whole thing together and made my job possible. The fact that I could go and stand in front of the firing line and say, we can do it, but knowing full well that when I went back to the workshop that would be greeted with an enthusiastic band of people.
The burden for this movie was going to be casting a woman who fundamentally you believe is an action lead.
I can't see anything.
Things don't always go according to plan, and we might have to have 2, 3, 4 takes at making it work. You can go to him and go, Ridley, we can make this work.
It is quite brutal, and it's very in your face in places.
There's a version of kind of female action hero that we see a lot in movies now that is fun, fundamentally, but it exists as a kind of pop creation. In this case, the whole point was to play this from a place of reality, so you were there. If the movie is going to scare you, you have to believe it's happening, you have to believe a woman would go through this, and you have to believe a woman could survive this and defeat whatever she was facing.
Like, Ridley wants it to be real, even though the situation is totally unreal and out in, in the future and everything.
And action.
When I talked to Ridley about that storm sequence, he said, think of a storm that's stronger than anything you could ever imagine in your life. That you can't stand up in it, it blows you away. If you put a vehicle in it, it tips it over. So he was after some kind of really dynamic sequence. Normally it's just a little car park beyond the backs of the 007 stage, but what they'd done to this now, they'd kind of levelled it out, and we'd got in all these shipping containers, 4 or 5 high, and we turned it into this massive sort of green screened area, so it then doubled up for the planet area.
Because once I step up, that's the gag, right?
Actors act is what I've learned. So once they get into that moment, and you've talked all these things through about, you guys, you got to go really slowly and do this and do that. All those things can go out of the window because they're in the moment and they're acting, and all of a sudden they're giving it too much beans and they'll spill themselves out, and it's an accident waiting to happen. So I kind of like to put a lot of safety methods in there, whereas we put the restrictor so they can only go a certain speed.
There are elements where it could get very dangerous, but you have an incredible crew and you bust your ass in the stunts. I mean, Numi is like myself. We want to do as much as we can that we are insured to do. And so, I watched my stunt guy jump off the ATV, and I tried to make sure I did it just as good, if not better.
They were tracked ATVs, they were difficult vehicles, we had to jump it off the ramp, and then it would, one moment they would grip one side and not the other, and it was, so he did a little bit, but not a huge amount. To me, that was the biggest action sequence in it as a set piece. So as they arrive him back from picking the head up, they jump off the back, the head gets blown away. So we would have rehearsed that with our doubles. Basically, she stands down, she gets jerked off the ground, and then she gets blown tumbling down towards this big stanchion, which is the leg of the main spaceship. She gets pinned against that. And then Holloway sees that, comes out on his bike, jumps off the edge of the ramp there, drives down to her, the wind bowls that over.
That was a lot of work for us there. We had 4 massive big aero wind machines up there, probably 15 to 20 guys all throwing vermiculite and dust. So that was pretty full on, all that work, and at night as well.
The pieces that were kind of in the storm that were kind of hitting me, it was really hard, and it felt like somebody was punching me. So even though it's a fake situation, you get really bruised and you know, sore, and we were shooting night time. It was dark and really cold.
It was a night shoot. We were working with the elements of those wind machines, and they changed what we did with the wires quite a bit. We couldn't shoot that on a set, so everything I put towards that, we had to basically, I had to create a grid over the top of this exterior set. So what I'd done basically was I brought in a load of mechanical winches, which give you the ability to be able to lift somebody up in the air, fly them across the ground, jerk them off the ground, tumble them. Because of the tight schedule on that movie, that set was never really finished until the day we shot on it. So I was having to work rehearsals in the evening on that set while those guys were basically making the set during the day.
We were actually rehearsing and working with that sequence before we started to shoot the movie. And we were, you know, hanging on these wires and going back and forth. And I think, you know, all this is really fun. I enjoy it, and I want to do as much as I can. My stunt double is fantastic, but I really want to do it. So it's like, but sometimes they can't let us do everything, because if I get hurt or, you know, if something happened to me, it could kind of be a disaster.
I mean, I was really lucky with that double, to tell you the truth. When I actually first did some test stuff for Ridley for it, I actually brought her in. That was before they'd cast Noomi, and we shot with test stuff with her. And like 2 weeks after that, he was talking about Noomi, and he said, I want to have that double, because you could shoot on her. She was amazing. The tumbling and bouncing around stuff was, you know, that was all her double. But then, you know, we still got moments of being on this, when we were doing the rescue, we used pretty much all of the actress, and the same for Charlie as well. You can program those winches so that you could, you know, I could pick somebody up and bounce them around the rooms here very, very safely. So it is something you could use with the real actor, but they need to have time to feel comfortable and you know, feel comfortable with what they're doing. So it was you know, we didn't get a huge amount of rehearsal time with them, but I think David, Michael Fassbender, we had like 1 day's rehearsal with him, but he nearly did, I'd say 90% of his own stuff. He did an amazing job, actually, really, really amazing job.
It's a lot of fun. You get to do wire work, which is good fun, you know. Once you sort of get everything tucked up out of the way in the harness, it's not looking too good for them, really. So David just sort of goes about his thing, and he puts a harness on his back and opens up the door of the spaceship and goes out and saves their lives. But, you know, it's wire work, so you just have to sort of allow yourself to go and enjoy the ride, and it sort of takes you along.
Open the door. Open the door. That good?
That is so scary!
This is when they'd found out that Charlie was, all the way through that mission, Charlie's kind of deteriorating. He's kind of, stuff's happening to him, he's feeling ill. But he's basically been impregnated by the alien. They're rushing to come back onto the ship. Vickers has heard what's going on all the intercom on the way back in, and she's basically meeting them at the garage.
What the hell?
He's not coming on the ship.
It's a particularly tricky scene for Noomi emotionally, because her love interest in the film is being burnt to death, and also for Charlize, because we actually gave her a practical flamethrower.
If you need to turn it on and off, if anything happens to go wrong, just switch that off and drop it.
I don't like the words. If something happens to go wrong.
So we had a little rehearsal with her, put her in a fire suit and made sure she was comfortable doing it. I'd had a stunt double for her, and we were just messing around, Ridley and I, and Ridley went, well, listen, wouldn't it be cool if we could get a shot of Charlize setting him on fire?
Yeah, that was my last day of shooting in London, actually. We did that, and I'm sure they made it the last day just in case something went aflame.
Setting anybody on fire is hard enough, you know, I mean, the preparation that goes into a full body burn is quite intense. Obviously, he's got all the gel suits on, he's completely protected. But the reality of any burn is it's a very dangerous thing to do.
Action flourish!
He's got to step closer to me before I do it.
Let him get closer. Okay, cameras are running. Hold it. 3, 2, 1, action!
The fear that something had actually hurt the guy, and I think that came across. It's one of the few moments in the film where Charlize's character shows some vulnerability, in that she's actually killing somebody, and you could see that in her eyes that she didn't like doing it. She was uncomfortable doing it, and when we cut and we put the stuntman out, she was still quite freaky until the moment when the stuntman put his thumbs up and said he's okay.
Oh my God, I'm so shaking right now.
You got that,
Not my favorite thing, I have to say. I had like a little moment of, oh, this is badass, and I'm really badass because I've got this flamethrower and I'm just being a badass in a Ridley Scott movie. And then I went, okay, don't want to burn this guy, and I want to be able to live with myself. And this, these stunt guys are crazy. They're just insane.
Well done, Rob. Very nice, mate.
Burn through all those layers.
For us as stunt people, it's that's what we do. We get set on fire, and it's no big deal. But for someone to actually torch somebody, it's a big deal for them. You're not you're kind of trusting on me saying that, yeah, he'll be fine. We've got this special gel. He's all gelled up. He'll be fine.
The flame was so hot that I had a space helmet on, and I could feel the heat like through the space helmet, and he's just lying there.
I felt it through the... Yeah, no, I would like some vodka.
And so after one take, and I was like, did we get that? Did we get that? I was like, okay, no more. And then of course Ridley is just like, now we're gonna put 7 cameras over there, you're gonna do it again, and then we're gonna do it here. And I was just like, don't want to burn this guy anymore.
A marker. B marker. All right, shooting now.
Sci-Fi was another big workshop moment for us, because I think there was a lot of processes when we were talking about that. It was the visual effects as to what they were going to do with the look of this character. Originally it was going to be a full-on CG character, so we were going to basically shoot the action without anybody in there, and then shoot a plate, and then they were going to put the creature in there. And then we got talking, and like Ridley was saying, let's see what he can bring to the table. I started workshopping with him, and we'd shoot some moments of him kind of going crazy, as Sean does. And they loved the idea of him using some part of him within that moment. So it starts off in a really cool way. These 2 guys are not really sure what's happening. They're walking out, they walk down the ramp, they're trying to have a look what's going on. The next thing you know, this creature just rears up.
And you're on the way up, so far, keep going. And click body and up higher. Yeah, higher. 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 That's it. That's nasty. You, nasty.
Which we still haven't seen really what it is yet. And then it just goes to town on them. We smashed helmets, ripped heads off. There was guys running in to pick up axes. He runs down, and the guy's setting him on fire, and he disappears around a corner. The next thing you know, he's flying off the top of this truck, and they're shooting him, and he's on fire. As Sci-Fi's running through the garage, we've got these mechanics running and getting flame torches. So as he runs around the corner, we clip him with the fire. So then from then on in, that was probably like maybe a quarter of the way through the sequence. We did this with Sean as well. I've glued him up and we've set him on fire. And pretty much for the whole scene, we've just gone, yep, he's still on fire, keep him on fire. So Sean's kind of like, yeah, I'm acting, and then I've got my arm on fire, and I'm trying to project these moments to her, and I'm like, I'm trying to look at him, going, right, Sean, you've got to make sure let me know when you're getting warm, and you can see that he's into his acting moment. So I'm trying to judge when the right time is, and do the safety call on when I think he's had enough to basically come in and put him out. But he must have done 90% of that sequence with him on fire. It was off the wall, that sequence, I think. The guy that plays engineer Ian, he came to this project without me really knowing him or knowing of him, and me being really concerned about the fact that this guy, he was 7'4", and I'm like, how am I going to double him? What am I going to do? He's got a real integral part in the movie. He has the fight with Wayland and picks those guys up. I'd say 90% of his work is stunt orientated, and I was like, how am I going to double this guy?
You all right?
So I said, I need to meet with him, and we need to talk and start making sure that I'm happy that he can do all the things, otherwise I'm going to go on a global search for a giant to double another giant.
Is that the only issue?
In story terms, he's kind of 9 foot tall, so I'm like just sort of playing around with ideas with Ridley and going, they don't know how to fight, but they can move. And he's like, yeah. And I said, but these guys are just at that size, they're just going to be really strong. So they're just going to pick stuff up and just bowl them out of the way. And he's like, that's exactly what it is.
The body will drop here, but I'm saying that's why one of these should be cut me off here if I'm the giant.
So we take the platform out.
See the body fall in and thrash. This one, if you get it right in here, and Danny's over there, hit him and see his body going down there as well.
But if he goes wallop and then drops the head there,
oh yeah, fine.
Do you know what I mean? So my head there.
He can run past that and kick the
He can walk.
Yes.
He can walk between the head and Wayland, you mean?
I really enjoyed that sequence because again, that was like they've taken Wayland. Wayland's in these calipers. He can't move properly. They bring him forwards, and it's kind of like you're never really sure where that sequence is going to go. He comes in, and it's a really calm bit of that where he thinks he's met his saviour, and there's a lovely sort of engaging moment of him sort of touching heads and so forth, and it just goes into head coming ripping off.
Action!
And he clubs Wayland. Next thing you know, Ford's flung off the stage. And then Bramwell gets picked up and chucked off. And it came out of nowhere. I really enjoyed that. I got through the piece that we did with Fifield, and then I just sort of started to channel my energies towards the end of the movie, this engineer versus Shaw troglodyte sequence. Those moments of them working together was really interesting because Numi's like 5'1" and Ian's like 7'4", so he just looks monstrous to her.
Remark on the end. 48 frames.
Number set.
Set, and action!
We were capitalising on his strengths. But he still moved really quickly, so he could still grab hold really quickly. But whenever he got hold of anything, it would be not a punch or a kick or it was a pick up and a throw. So we were just slamming bodies against walls, pulling legs out. He gets stabbed with the axe. It doesn't even affect him. Takes the axe out. He just keeps coming. He was this sort of demonic, strong thing until he gets into the room with the troglodyte. Ridley just said he wanted it to be like an enveloping moment, something that is just permanently kind of suffocating him. So we played around with all these ideas of keeping him sort of stood on his feet all the time and keeping him wrestling until we came to this. Actually, it was Ridley that came up with it. I'd love to claim the idea because I think it works great, but it was this, like, Ridley said, well, no, what about if he starts, and so the troglodyte comes and it grabs him and it just starts lifting him up to the ceiling.
I don't think I'm supposed to be like this.
The whole angles and dimension of it just changed so much because Ian was such a huge, 7-foot guy, and we ended up having him walking up the walls in this building with like this troglodyte strangling him, and it just added a great dimension to the whole fight, really. We'll give you that moment when you're at the door for the last moment, is that when we go, you go, ah! You get that register that something's on your face. That's lovely, you know. Yeah. Gives that sort of bit more franticness to it. Cool.
When you come in here, I have a couple of these here. You're looking right at now it's fight.
And action! And now! Cut! Got it.
The other section, which we shot in the Central Highlands, in the Hecla Valley, was more to do with the crash sequences that were done by a combination of work on the Icelandic landscape and the backlot at Pinewood Studios, where they abandoned, after having crashed into the Juggernaut, the survivors of the Prometheus in their escape pods find themselves on the planet's surface for the first time.
Prometheus, come in. Sure. This ship is taking off. Listen to me. This ship is taking off. You can't let it go. Yeah.
The location that I found was about 2 kilometers off the end of the service road that was about 45 minutes off the paved road, which was 6 hours away from Reykjavik.
We were doing some of the post-Prometheus crash, so we were having bits of spaceship lying around, and we were doing a lot of running with Shaw and Vickers before the big donut come down and crushed Vickers. It looked fantastic because it's all volcanic rock, and it felt like you were on some kind of other planet. We had a set piece that we then dropped on top of the actress to simulate her being semi-crushed by the Juggernaut.
I think it should be a real wide angle. Wham! Just have to drop it on her.
And then crawling out from underneath that, and then continuing on for the, where we start to see her on the top of the iris, which is cracking open, which we shot back in the UK with this big jump over a chasm. And then we just see her with the iris opening up, running away from all of that to tie into basically her getting the Prometheus to take off and crash into the Juggernaut.
All right?
Yeah.
So now you're going to drive the HGV. That was shot in the valley in Iceland, where you're running around in what fundamentally is a volcanic cinder valley, and then you're going to put everything in around it. All I used was the ground. Arthur Max went in with his crew, and they laid out what was a causeway.
All our vehicles were actually running down a road that we created in the landscape and sculpted and landscaped with our greens department and populated with our couple of dozen pinnacles, which eventually were extended digitally.
It's all the driving stuff Actors going in and out on ATVs and rovers returning, so different formations of that, which will lead us into the piece with the storm chasing them back into the garage sequence. We were using David doing some riding stuff on the ATVs. We've had Shaw as a passenger, and Holloway bringing them back in.
This is the best unit I've worked with for a very, very, very long time. All of you. I mean, I know most of you anyway, but actually it's been very enjoyable for me, particularly enjoyable this film. And what started out, every film's always a challenge, but you're such a great lot, knowing what you're doing, that the whole thing's been a fantastic ride. Thank you very much.
Wrapping up Robin Hood at the time, and he came to me and said, you know, I've got the Alien movie that I'm starting up next. Are you interested? And it's kind of one of those like, wow, I can't believe I just got asked by Ridley personally, you know, do I want to do his next science fiction movie?
The visual effects work just seemed to be spread everywhere. I mean, there were a lot of things that were ambiguous as to how much Arthur could build, how much Ridley could shoot practically, and, you know, it was clear that there was going to be pretty major visual effects shots.
He really just said, you know, let's go into it thinking, here's the world I want to show, and here's the things that we couldn't do on the first one. Let's show it for real this time, and let's make these grand environments and giant spaceships.
I'll never be the same again. I mean, green screen has proved to be phenomenally well done between Weta and MPC in London. Fundamentally, these two companies have tackled what amounts to almost 1,300 of very sophisticated effect shots. Lived absolutely up to my expectations of what was digitally drawn 13 months prior. And if in doubt, they'd say, what about? I said, I want it like that. I'd show this big, glossy, literally photographic version of what I wanted. Just keep tapping it. I'm a great believer in doing my R&D and sticking with my R&D.